Some lights float in the sky of a still unknown city with a phrase from someone we do not yet know. We see a red car speeding and a man wearing a helmet with a look of surprise on his face. The same red car crashes into the helmeted motorcyclist seen earlier, hitting him on the right side. Both the motorcycle and the man are thrown far away after the impact while a type of necklace is flung to a separate frame below. The man falls headfirst to the ground while the motorcycle lands a little further in front of him. We observe the driver of the red car leaving the scene without providing any assistance to the motorcyclist. With his last efforts, he remembers how he lived his life, recalling everything that had happened up to that moment. He talks about the school he attended when he was younger and a bit about his professional life. He remembered his mother and all the efforts she made to help her son, even getting into debt in the process without the help of his now deceased father. Unfortunately, his mother recently died of pancreatic cancer, and the motorcyclist wonders if she would be proud of him. The necklace seen earlier begins to shine more intensely, catching our character's attention. That was a gift from his father, and with his last efforts, he tries to reach the only thing he has left in the world. Right after he manages to touch the object, we see some rays of light even stronger than the previous ones. Suddenly, we shift to a new location where a man with long hair and white robes is seen lying in his bed. The man opens his eyes and, looking at his hands, wonders how he survived the accident, being sure he had died at that moment. His mind begins to be flooded with memories of another person we discover is named Cho Huai. We see a couple coming to talk to Hui, who wakes up with some headaches a little later. A man with darker clothes and tied-up hair tells us that Hui had been sleeping for 3 days while writhing in his bed. His stomach begins to rumble while a woman in purple clothes with a sad look comments on the lack of food in her family's home. She asks the man with tied-up hair if he still has no news about a person named Bang Da. Our protagonist gives us an introduction to this character through thought bubbles about who this person might be. Bang Da monopolized iron and salt in Anhui, saying he needed them to create a perfect sword that would be blessed by a priest. The man with tied-up hair responds with a sad face and his head lowered, looking hopelessly at the ground. As they continue the conversation, we see Hui thinking about who might be responsible for this situation. We can see the appearance of a commander from the Fahrenheit faction, who had indebted people after charging abusive taxes from the residents. The couple is seen ending the conversation while the man with tied-up hair leaves the house, asking the woman to take care of Hui. We see a general view of that location surrounded by walls with some buildings and objects around a road made of stone blocks. Our protagonist appears at the entrance of one of the buildings in the area, introducing us to the couple from the previous conversation. Choo-soon is a common blacksmith and Hui's father, and his mother is a very caring woman named Aeon-gak. He also shows us his older brother Cho-hyuk and his younger sister Cho-yan. Reflecting on all this, Hui comments on the amount of knowledge flowing in his head while he had nothing left from his previous world. We can see some unknown silhouettes with red eyes while our character comments on Saima standing out in his mind. Just thinking about the word, his body was instantly covered by an unexplained rage. He wonders why he still has memories of his previous life and what the reason is for living someone else's life. While complaining about having been a public servant for 7 years with a miserable life, he also wonders if all this doesn't resemble web novels of fictional worlds. With all these doubts, he sets out in search of his brother, who might be able to help him and who is training alone in the backyard. Upon finding Hyuk, he realizes that his brother wasn't actually very good at martial arts, doubting his abilities as a fighter. He calls his brother, who turns to him, asking if he was feeling better. Hwai replies that he feels fine and continues the conversation, asking where he learned martial arts. His brother explains that he trained with a soldier friend in exchange for a bottle of alcohol, and our protagonist begins to show us a little more of who he is. Hui, uninterested in learning that, mocks his brother, asking if it wasn't actually some stranger on the street pretending to be a soldier. As Hyuk responds with an aggressive tone, he begins forming his first impressions of who his brother might really be. The two brothers talk a bit more, and Hyuk mentions some legendary martial artists that normal people like them could never compare to. After getting some information about how things work in that world, his brother asks if he is interested in learning martial arts. But our protagonist declines the offer for training, turning his back on his brother and reflecting on how everyone around him seems like an idiot. Looking at the clouds in the nearby scenery, he thanks fate for at least being alive, saying that this is better than almost dying. As he walks forward with a determined look, he says, "Today I start my life as Hwai, and I will make sure to survive." 2 months later, Hwai tells us a bit more about his new daily life. One of the details is that his father occasionally comes home with some money, managing to buy a few things to eat during the month. The only thing he knows is that some nobles visit his father from time to time, and his family has no idea how he gets this money periodically. During dinner, it's revealed one of the methods his father used, he had borrowed 60 gold coins from a loan shark. His wife asks him how they would ever be able to repay that money, starting a small argument between the two. Worried that the loan shark might kill their family, she confronts her husband, who justifies his actions by saying that without the loan shark's money, they would starve. He asks her to eat a little and tells her not to worry because he will handle the problems with the loan shark. During dinner, we see more of Gui's thoughts, where we discover that besides the lack of food, hygiene is also scarce in their home. As his father belches and picks his teeth, throwing the dirt on the table, his sister tells their mother that she can finally wash her hair. Upset with the reality, Hui asks his father where he could find animal hair that is very strong. His father replies that bear hair could work for him and asks if he wants some from his last hunt. He thanks his father for the help, and we cut to a scene where a ball of hair tied in a cloth appears. With his free time, he decides to create some toothbrushes for his family. With some thin wooden sticks and bare hair, he assembles a few brushes by sticking the hair to one side of the sticks with some kind of glue. His sister sees what he's making and with a surprised look asks what it is. He replies that it's nothing special, asking her to go back home, which turns her surprised face into a pout that he finds cute. After finishing the toothbrushes, he puts them in a small wooden box as packaging and gives them to his family, explaining how to use them. His father is fascinated by what his son made and asks if he plans to sell them. They head to the marketplace with some toothbrushes ready and set up a stall, presenting them to the people around. Selling 250 toothbrushes in 3 hours, they are extremely happy with a profit of 500 silver coins, and the story then introduces the reader to a bit of the local economy. 500 silver coins would be equivalent to 5 gold coins, and after doing some calculations, White tells his father that if everyone helped, they could make 3,000 brushes a day. He continues by saying that if they sold everything and deducted the costs, they would have a total profit of 80 gold coins, enough to pay off the debt to the loan shark. Returning home and sharing the news with his family, his mother is extremely happy, and everyone is seen helping with the production together. The hostile and sad atmosphere of the family that had been presented in the family argument during Chapter 1 no longer exists. Everyone can be seen together, united in helping with the production of the goods with the hope of a better future. But the next morning, when they return to the marketplace, they can't believe what they see in front of them. They see several people at stalls along the road selling the same toothbrushes they created with some improvements made. One of the merchants explains that his brush is set in an iron core, which would make the brush last 2 to 3 times longer than the wooden ones. Putting his hands on his face, Huai laments that his idea was stolen and mentions that back then, there were no laws against plagiarism. Father and son then wonder what they could do from that point onward to earn money and pay the loan shark with only 15 days left. But in complete silence and sadness, they return home together. Thinking about what he could do to make money, Boy considers creating things from his old world, like electricity or even a weapon. But he gives up on these ideas because of some complexities that he couldn't develop quickly and easily. His sister appears, interrupting his reflection, asking if he wasn't going to fetch water so she could wash her hair. While he seems more concerned with making money, his sister is worried about her appearance, which leads to a small argument between them. His brother appears, interrupting the fight and starting his training, which in Hui's view was useless given all the problems they were facing. Yen runs towards her brother Hyuk and asks if he wasn't acting differently than usual. His sister comments that he was able to quickly calculate the number of brushes the family needed, which seemed unusual to her. Hyuk replies that he was also surprised, but that their brother had always studied throughout his life, so it wasn't anything unexpected. Listening to his siblings' conversation, he then realizes that mathematics wasn't something known to the people and wonders if it could be a kind of skill for him. We delve a bit more into what our protagonist knew in his past life, such as the age of technology, which brought the possibility of learning many things. And just by knowing these things, he already surprised his sister, making him think that he might have the potential of a genius living in that place. He then picks up a stick and kneels on the dirt ground in front of him, asking his 2 siblings for permission. As he starts writing some things on the ground, he begins to think about what he could do with the knowledge he had that others didn't. Scribbling some of the words he drew, he discards ideas until he finds the best one, where we see the word economy highlighted. The next day, he meets with his father, who was working at the forge, asking him to pass on the right of succession for the Cho family. His father, not fully understanding the proposal, asks what kind of nonsense he was talking about. He explains that he had some ideas and that he planned to carry them out. Soon asks what the ideas are and comments that the forge couldn't be operated by a child due to a lack of experience and the necessary blacksmith spirit. Huai then continues, asking his father how much longer he could keep living that way. His father responds to the question with astonishment, looking at his son with the hammer in hand, sitting on a wooden log. He continues his reasoning and asks his father what he would do if a loan shark came to cut off his arm because of the debt he had incurred. This makes the father a bit angry, standing up with an expression of rage, but his son continues. Hui goes on, analyzing all the costs his father had in that workshop, such as the equipment and the anvil. He also comments on the good reputation his father had and that it could serve as collateral. Asking if he could ever, as a blacksmith, gather 300 silver coins, we see soon getting even angrier. Huai says that no matter where the money comes from, he would be able to repay his father threefold in the future. His father reveals a different worldview from his son's, even questioning his son's morals for trying to negotiate with his own father. He asks his son some questions, raising his right hand with the forge hammer held as if he were going to hit him. But to Hui's surprise, he continued to wear a confident expression, with no fear, looking coldly at his father. This made his father think even more about how different he actually was after falling ill, wondering if the new plan was similar to the toothbrushes. He sits down, closing his eyes and sighing, asking his son to continue with the explanation of his idea, and Huai responds that he wants to have the best forge in Anhui. His father asks a few more questions, and he proceeds to explain his plan step by step. He mentions that he could buy iron ingots for 3 silver coins and that the best-selling item at the forge was the iron plow. His initial idea is to sell iron plows to farmers, reducing the current market price by 30%, which makes his father dislike the idea. Soon explains that an iron plow takes an average of 15 days to make, and Hui continues his explanation. He asks his father if he could forge the iron plow with the ingots in 4 or 7 days. Soon says it's impossible to do that in less time and for less money, because his salary was 10 silver coins per day and 4 days would be 40 coins in total. We see the protagonist explaining how supply and demand work, where he wanted to initially hire 20 people while his father would provide the training. We see some of the roles that would need to be created, such as the charcoal burner, and also how the shifts for his workers would operate. They discuss some initial details about what needed to be done and what the shifts for each role would be, and we can see his father starting to change his mind. What seemed unrealistic began to make sense to Soon, who, instead of being angry, now appeared thoughtful, listening to his son explain how everything would work. Finally, explaining the last necessary role, which would be the smelters, he also mentions that he would sell everything by offering promotions and discounts for now. Each role would have a daily wage with different amounts, and if everything went as planned, they would produce 20 plows per day, increasing production later. And when he finally talks about the profit they could make by working together, his father realizes the potential of what his son was proposing. Deep down, his father thought it was wrong and against the principles of a blacksmith, but the idea of making 60 gold coins at the end of the month made him indecisive. Noticing this, Hui begins to try to persuade his father, who eventually accepts the proposal in exchange for giving up on continuing as a blacksmith. They end up making an agreement, and the chapter continues showing us Hui's new work system based on the Industrial Revolution. We see a panel showing some people working on production lines from the previous world, followed by an overhead view of a city in the current world. The image zooms in and we can see Hui and his father walking on a dirt road, followed a man in blue robes with another man behind them. Two guards in red uniforms and armor are positioned further ahead as they head towards the entrance. While Hui seemed calm and thought about buying some shoes that wouldn't hurt his feet, Soon beside him was terrified for some reason and stood still, staring at the place. Hui asks why he had stopped walking and continues, saying that having the soul of a craftsman was useless if he was afraid of that. One of the guards asks them to get in line. Hui thanks him and keeps walking while he starts analyzing the place, beginning with the guard. They find a line for what seems to be their destination. From what our protagonist observes, people don't seem to be leaving there satisfied for some reason. It's his turn in line and he asks his father, who is scared of the situation, to wait outside. Soon thanks his son, and we continue the story by seeing Hui entering the place. Inside, we see a man in yellow robes at the center, different from the others, with some kind of document in front of him and a pen in his hands. The man in yellow was named Jia. He looks at Hui and asks how much the young man needs. Hui asks for 300 silver coins with a smile on his face, which doesn't seem to please the man at first, who asks to have him removed from there. With that, our protagonist tries to start persuading the man, saying that if he does that, he would deeply regret it in the future. Trying to catch the man's interest somehow, Jia asks what his starting point was. He introduces himself to the man and says he's there on behalf of the Cho clan. Jia then slams the table in anger and asks if the man in front of him is treating the rival merchant group called Fire Dragon with inferiority. Hui justifies his words and they proceed with the meeting. We see our protagonist pulling out his red book from his jacket to start explaining his proposal. He begins to propose some guarantees that included his family's materials and properties to secure the loan, which totaled only 150 coins. Jia asks him to explain what the guarantee for the other 150 of the 300 requested would be, and he uses his family's lives as collateral. The man is shocked by what Hui just said, but he continues explaining his idea of selling them into human trafficking through the black market. By saying this, he finally gets the man's attention, who starts to realize that Hua might not just be crazy and actually knows how to negotiate to some extent. After finalizing a few more details, Hua continues with his persuasion plan, showing the man the ideas contained in the red book he had previously taken out. Jia begins to consider the proposal with an angry look while Hua states that if he rejects the offer, he will go to another rival merchant. Jia is surprised by his negotiation skills and orders his general to immediately bring 1,000 silver coins. He then explains that by selling his family as slaves, that would be the price for their lives, further explaining that if he didn't repay the money, he would be sold. Hua then puts his book away, and while Jia says a few more things in a threatening tone, Hua leaves. His father then asks what the next step is, and his son replies that he already put up a sign with job openings in front of their house. Returning home to see how many people were interested after seeing this sign, he is greeted by a place crowded with people looking for him. He begins conducting some tests to select only those who fit the culture of his company and dismisses those he doesn't consider capable of contributing. We see some scenes from his past life where he tells us that he learned about economics and management at his jobs and dreamed of starting a business one day. He introduces himself to the crowd and begins explaining when the work would start and the contract he had prepared for his employees. He starts explaining to the people what they can do with the contract, and some of them seem confused by so much information. Hua continues his speech, providing information about the salary they would receive, with the possibility of earning a bonus if they work more. He also mentioned the weekly paid leave, justifying it by saying that everyone needed rest to be well. To further impress the people, he mentioned a 50% performance bonus if they produced 30 kilos and met the daily target. And he said that besides the weekly leave, they would also have a monthly day off, and if they decided to work on their day off, they would be paid double. To conclude his proposal, he mentioned the annual leave, where if they worked the entire year without taking days off, they would earn 5 days of leave to use the following year. Everyone present was amazed by what they heard, and meanwhile, our protagonist recalls one of his former jobs. He explained the system he was using and asked for confidentiality from the people interested in the job. If people broke this agreement, they would be fired from the company, and finally, the crowd agreed to everything in the contract they signed. He begins to separate the people to provide job training and ensures they would be paid even if they only worked for one day. After the agreement with his employees is made, he then sets his plan in motion. While his father seemed irritated that the people weren't doing things as perfectly as possible, we can see a change in behavior in the next panel with a more polite approach, where he he chooses his words more carefully, praising his employees. Apparently, his son had taught him some communication techniques, which makes Hua feel a certain pride in the man who had learned. He asks to speak with his father about starting production slowly, but he informs him that it would be impossible at that moment. Soon turns his face with an angry expression and explains that the quality of the materials wasn't good enough. His son says it wouldn't be a problem if they were slightly below ideal, but he complains, saying they haven't even reached half of the desired quality yet. Hua says he needs money to pay the salaries on the 20th and tries to push his father to start as soon as possible. His father, after hearing everything, asks for 3 more days for the training to finish, and Hua says that will be the final deadline. 3 days later, we can see a more efficient production line this time, completing the entire process of creating the materials with iron. Seeing what they had created, his father is surprised by his son, who was able to think of all this. We see some scenes of his father reminiscing about the things he used to do and the time he spent alone on the same tasks. Then the first item is finished, which makes his father cry, lamenting the years of life lost upon seeing it working. He begins talking to his son about it until Hua asks if the place isn't a bit emptier than usual. His father explains that some people are resting at the moment. That day, they produced 22 iron plow pieces, and in less than 4 days, they had already produced 100 pieces. After 6 months, we see a production line with many more people working together. Hua now appears in a place with several pairs of shoes and what seems to be a black bag in his hands. As he walks, we see the workshop manager, Lee Yo-song, ahead of him with a daily report in hand. We notice that the company now has more than one building where materials are produced and performance evaluations are still being conducted. They start discussing the management of the company while we can see the current work areas. Hua restructured the Cho clan's workshop into 3 pavilions. In the Daisen Pavilion, we found the most efficient and experienced workers who handled larger and more complex products. In the Sozin Pavilion, there were the new recruits who took care of producing simpler and smaller materials. And a newly created pavilion called Gizin, where they were producing some items and means of transportation, such as carriages and iron wheels. Now we see Manager Lee informing Hua that a guest had arrived 2 hours ago and was waiting for him to finish his work. Our protagonist says that he should have been informed earlier and rushes to the location, where we see John Jai sitting and enjoying his tea. Hua enters the room calling the man a god, and John Jai, laughing, calls him my brother, showing us that they had become good friends. Hua comments on the last drinking session they had and asks if the man still wanted to kill his younger brother. John Jay says no and continues the conversation with him naturally. During the conversation, we see a reversal of the current situation where Hua is now demanding silver coins from the man who gave him his first loan. With the payment made and the bag of coins in hand, and after chatting a bit more about trivial matters, we see them finally deciding to talk about business. Zhang asks about a problem with the sponsors that still existed, and Hua responds by saying he needs to think a bit more about the matter. He asks Hua to be careful due to his lack of time and that he couldn't use the Fire Dragon merchant's name forever. He starts explaining how the Cho clan's business had grown and that people would eventually know they were the suppliers. He is concerned about the possibility of officials raiding and interrogating Hua because of his cheaper materials. Zhang Zhou explains the problems he might face in the future for doing business with the clan. Hua tries to calm him by saying that nothing has happened yet, but his words weren't enough to convince the man. Hua then pulls out his red notebook, which seems to annoy Zhang Jia, and begins to speak. He explains that he had a meeting with another group of merchants who gifted him a pair of silk-lined shoes. They also tried to make a business proposal to Hua, who tries to imagine why they would want that. As Hua speaks, Zhang Jia snatches the notebook from his hand and begins an argument with him, asking if people are united only by profit. He also informs him that this wouldn't be the only problem to face because some merchants had united to protest in front of his group. He points at Hua and says that these protesters would soon come after them because those people's lives were at stake. Hua says he has already thought about what to do about that, which surprises Zhang Jia. They mention a lord named Bang, saying he would be a good supporter to have on their side, but that just one workshop wouldn't be enough to achieve that. Hua then reveals his profit in just 1 month, which once again surprises Zhang Jia, who seems astonished by every sentence uttered by our protagonist. He continues by mentioning that his real fear is dealing with those who intend to bring down the Cho clan's forge. He then tells us about the Iron Blood group, which had the resources to eliminate their enemies without leaving traces and free from imperial law. Hua dips his fingertips into the tea on his table as he announces his final decision to Zhang Jia. He speaks about a group full of disciples from the general's clans of the imperial family, and how the mere name of the swordsmanship abode caused fear. He continues, mentioning the chiefs of the great fire clans who had master swordsmen in the high ranks of Jianghu's hierarchy. Zhang Jia, momentarily incredulous, looks at Hua, who announces that he wants nothing less than the king of Enhui as his new sponsor. We can see, as a few scattered phrases frame the next image, that the protagonist's real goal is absolute domination. Zhang Jia's chair crashes to the floor as he pushes it back, standing up in disbelief at what he just heard, asking if that was really possible. We cut to a scene from a few days earlier, where we find Sang Guanbi in the center of Enhui at the Jiangbong City Hall, where some swordsmen are seen talking. Hua approaches the place and asks a white-haired man what was going on, who explains the reason behind a fight that had broken out. A swordsman in red robes declares a battle with the goal of taking over a brothel. Hua is now witnessing the first real sword fight happening in this world, unlike in his previous one. The two fighters lunge forward, clashing their swords together with a loud impact. We see one of the swordsmen defending some attacks and striking back while shouting. Meanwhile, the other swordsman, dressed in white, delivers a quick blow with his right arm, also holding a second sword in his other hand. Hua is impressed by the scene as he listens to the crowd's opinions about what was happening, noticing that they were not impressed by the fight. He turns his attention back to the fight, which continues with the swordsman in white jumping toward his opponent, delivering a downward slash in midair. Landing on the ground, he continues his attack, spinning on the floor with the other sword aimed at the neck of the swordsman in red. They are interrupted by a third person, causing both fighters to retreat slightly to better assess their new opponent. The swordsman in white asks who this man is, who begins hurling insults at him. We then see a man in a blue uniform with a bandana on his head, telling the two to disappear, which they immediately obey. Hua is even more impressed by all of this, realizing how much he needed that place on his side. We return to a new panel where we can observe the continuation of the conversation between Hua and Zhang Jia. They recall their first negotiation and discuss what had brought them afterward. Hua mentions that he plans to do the same with the Nambone family as soon as possible. Zhang Jia responds, saying that Hua is right in his decision because he was the one who made that forge grow so much in such a short time. He also asks that if Hua succeeds, he not forget his old partner and, in a friendly tone, asks if he won't receive anything in return for that. Zhang Jia leaves the place, bidding farewell to Hua, who wishes him a safe journey back. Someone seeing Hua return informs him that the person in charge of the forge wanted to meet with him. Since the person in charge was his father, he became curious to know what it was about or if something had happened. When he arrives, he kneels and we see his father entering through the side door with something in his hands, asking him to remain kneeling. He kneels in front of his son with a purple box in his hands, which makes Hua curious about everything. He explains that it is an ancient item passed down from generation to generation within their clan, and that it is a supernatural object that belonged to Patriarch Chomangdiuk. Although his father doesn't confirm this, he says that the ancestors of their family's clan wanted the item to be passed on to the next representative of the clan. Soon says that today is the day he decided to pass it on to his son. He continues saying that regardless of what others think, Hua was the one who managed to restore the greatness of their clan, and that he is perfect to be the leader. Hua explains that it was actually all of his father's merit, but he is interrupted as his father places his left hand on the purple box, now containing the item inherited by the protagonist. Hua begins to wonder if this was deja vu because in his past life, his father had also passed the same object to him. His father asks him to always keep the object, which seems to be a necklace, with him until he finds the next person to carry it forward for future generations. This is the mission of those who have received the celestial crimson jade. At that moment, Hua realizes what might explain what had happened to him and why he had managed to swap bodies with an ancestor. We can observe the necklace starting to speak while an aura spirals around it. It seems that more than one voice is speaking as we witness a conversation about the next bearer of the necklace. Hua is startled upon hearing this and asks his father if the crimson jade could talk. Upon hearing this, the object asks if that guy could hear them and how that could be possible. Realizing they could communicate, they rejoiced while his father stood up and began saying that he had also had this strange dream before. He warned his son that the object was not ordinary and that he should be prepared in his heart, to which Hua responded that he would follow his advice. He looks back at the jewel, which says silence to Hua, as we see a man with a fully purple, spectral aura and red eyes. This aura appears in front of him and angrily asks for his name. Hua, a bit frightened, responds with his name. The purple aura continues, saying that if this person could hear them, it meant that his spirit's energy had aligned with that of his descendants. However, the aura wondered where the boy's cord was, something that Hua didn't understand. The purple specter explains that by receiving the blessing of the celestial crimson jade, Hua would gain great abilities, but his destiny would be bound to the item. When Hua's life was connected to the specters, it would be tied by a cord. However, he didn't seem to have that on his body. Curious, our protagonist asks if he would gain abilities and is informed that receiving some kind of ability immediately would be normal. The specter continues, saying it wouldn't make sense for someone without this cord to have their spirit aligned with the descendants of their clan. He asks what kind of abilities they might be, and the aura responds that it could vary depending on his desires. For example, if he were a knight seeking principles of life, he would be struck by the lightning of fulfillment to become a sage. But Hua then says that he hasn't received any such blessing and wonders how things would have been if he had received it from the start. The dark aura then points its finger, cursing at Hua, and orders him not to lie because it wouldn't be possible for it to happen any other way. It mentions some abilities that could be useful to Hua, promising certain things. Hua tries to recall any moment like that in his life, wondering if he should reveal to them that he is actually a reincarnation. After reflecting on whether or not to tell the voices within the Crimson Jade about his reincarnation, he finally decides to reveal everything. One of the silhouettes wonders why he was suspicious of his own ancestors, trying to humble the protagonist. They then inform him that they only exist now as spirits, so they have no ability or intention to exert their powers in the material world. They establish a certain trust between themselves, showing complete openness to this new situation, as they were all part of his family after all. Hua is then convinced and tells them who he is and where he came from, which surprises the silhouettes even more, who express gratitude for what had happened. The silhouettes return inside the necklace as the previous environment fades and everything becomes calm again. We see the protagonist reflecting on what had happened, but he is quickly interrupted by the arrival of his older brother, excited about going on a trip. After a moment of silence, Hua shatters his brother's travel expectations by saying that, in fact, he cannot travel. The conversation between the brothers continues, with Hua saying that he is not going for mere leisure, and his brother promises to behave during the trip. He begs to be allowed to go along, but Hua refuses, saying something to distract him from the subject of the trip. His brother initially falls for it, but soon soon realizes that Hwa was trying to change the subject and resumes pleading to join the next destination. His father tries to help his son Hyuk by asking Hwa to take him along so that he doesn't have to bear the responsibilities alone since he is the older brother. Soon, in an extremely polite tone, asks Hwa to give in just this once, and we can notice how this character has grown over time. Because of this, Hwa asks if he will at least remain silent, and Hyuk affirms that he will, prompting Hwa to agree to take him along. Meanwhile, we see a silhouette approaching Hwa, informing him that a crowd of armed people was heading their way. We then see a man kicking open the door, followed by some people using their tools as weapons behind the clan leader. Hwa introduces himself to the crowd as the leader of that clan while hearing insults and threats from all those present. He asks why they were angry with him, and an older man says that there are moral codes in business, which makes the protagonist laugh. Hwa asks how long those men would watch him lower prices and make more profit than them without doing anything because of morality. At the same time that he gains the attention of the previously furious people, he also piques their curiosity, leading them into his workshop to show them something. Seeing the production lines he had set up, their minds fill with doubts, questioning what they were seeing. Making his superiority clear to everyone, he begins to use his argumentative power to once again draw everyone's attention to himself. He says that something won't remain in the shadows of Anhui forever, which starts to captivate the people. And here, he begins to criticize the king, whom he had previously decided to make his ally in a bid to gain the trust of the local residents who had been suffering. He mentions a bit of the history of the place where those people were living, motivating them to engage with the ideas he was presenting. Then, with a sudden shift in expectation, he once again draws attention to himself. He explains what needs to be done to take the next steps, asking everyone to unite with him and grow stronger together. He invites everyone to become the teachers of his workers, saying they would no longer need to work in the roles of a workshop. He pulls his father to his side and introduces him as the master of the Chu clan, saying that he alone was responsible for supervising the men at work. He starts presenting his proposals, highlighting the benefits they would receive and all the details that would seem advantageous to the crowd. Meanwhile, he walks toward a place where something is covered by a brown cloth, presenting it as his new solution. Under the cloth is a sign for the new Anhui workshop, but this would only happen if they accepted his proposal, which left everyone excited. When they agree, he asks his father to summarize the roles for the elders. Dropping his friendly facade, we now see him with a more hostile expression, saying that this is called a hostile takeover or M&A. He approaches Lee in another location in a new panel, and they begin talking shortly afterward. Hwa asks him to move half of his workers to another pavilion, while his manager asks if he's finally planning to develop the carriage. The protagonist says he is absolutely right and explains his plan to build something more technologically advanced that doesn't yet exist and has usability in that world. As they wrap up the conversation, he also asks that everything be prepared for the next day's journey at Hefei. But to his delight, everything was already prepared thanks to his manager being a trustworthy person. He asks how long his master will be away, and the master replies that he doesn't have a set return date because he needs to achieve his goal. He asked about the decisions that will need to be made in his absence, but Hwa says there's a book containing some problems that might arise. He gave permission for Lee to read the book, and we see the day pass until it's time to depart. We now see Hwa and Hyuk together, both on their own horses on a road, with Hwa struggling with the animals used for transport, unlike Hyuk. His brother holds in his hands a diary similar to his own but darker in color, which was a record of Murim users from the past 1,000 years. Hwa asks if that was really something interesting, and his brother responds that it is. He teases his brother as a nerd in his thoughts, but for some reason, his brother realizes that Hwa had thought poorly of him in his head. He says a few things that seem to have been bottled up for a long time and begins to vent, saying he couldn't believe Hwa was really his brother. The brother, whom he called innocent and naive, starts recounting some situations that caught his attention. But despite everything, even though Hwa was very competent, it didn't mean he was inferior to him. After listening to his brother, Hwa is surprised that this conversation is happening and praises his brother for the first time, saying that it seems he has trained a lot. Then Hyuk begins to recall an old situation that had happened with their family. Seeing the scene of their father being beaten by some bandits, he wanted to protect both Hwa and their father, but did nothing out of fear. But swearing that next time he would help and that no one would be hurt. Hwa says a positive phrase to encourage him to pursue his goal. With a touching scene between the brothers, we transition to a panel with the Crimson Jade discussing the boy's sharp tongue and his abilities. The Crimson Jade continues talking to itself while Hwa listens to the not-so-kind opinions of those present. He tells himself that the only thing he received from his ancestors was that jewel, and even so, their criticism was very intense. Thinking about these things, we discover along with Hwa that the Jade can read his thoughts because their spirits are connected. Hwa then asks the Crimson Jade if there are 8 of them in total, and if that is correct. 2 silhouettes appear in the background responding to our protagonist by saying that at least he is smart. Questioning whether he is truly intelligent, they begin to recall his previous life, where despite having some qualities, he was nothing extraordinary. Upon hearing this, the Jade says that he still hasn't understood the soul energy he possesses, but that his excellence is due to having reincarnated into another body. They start to positively comment on the things he has built so far, but also mention that he is not worthy of becoming the next king of Mangdiok. Cho Mangdiok was the founding patriarch of the Cho clan mentioned earlier, in case you don't remember, showing us one of the dark silhouettes within the Crimson Jade. Hwa, upon hearing this name, is shocked, wondering if this is the man he thinks it is. He says that, in fact, the Cho clan was much older, and that he was known as such because his father had centralized the clan around him after being adopted. Another silhouette of someone not yet shown continues talking with Mangdeok, who responds that this boy hasn't done anything remarkable yet. Hwa gets irritated by the elder's remarks and asks why his actions would be considered wrong. He continues to complain until his ancestors start shouting and cursing at him to shut up and not interrupt them. At this point, we are interrupted by his brother Hyuk on the horse beside him reading his green book and murmuring about a swordsman. Hwa, seeing his brother smiling, asks what happened, and he responds that he couldn't believe what he just read. We see a swordsman in blue robes, holding a wooden sheath with some black details in his left hand and a sword in his right, performing a single attack. With the sword raised, we see several bodies being thrown far away all at once in what seems to be a battle against the Dark Demon cult. He alone defeated the 8 strongest members, and with just 6 strikes, defeated the leader. Hwa asks what the Dark Demon cult is, and his brother explains that it's where the Dark Demon Palace originates from. Doubting the facts of this story a little, his brother continues the explanation. Despite being a martial artist who achieved such a feat, there aren't many records about him. The swordsman's name was unknown, and the only thing that remained was the nickname God of the Sword. No one knew which family he came from or how he had lived his life, as everything was shrouded in mystery, leaving only myths. He also complains that the martial arts master Sima Qian had at least 2 chapters of history, but about the God of the Sword, there were only 3 pages. The Crimson Jade then begins to ask if the boy had ever wondered why the descendants of the ancient Cho clan were living in poverty. This catches our protagonist's attention, who says he has no idea. He thought that an inheritance from an imperial family should last much longer than that of ordinary people. Then Mangdeok reveals the wealth he had accumulated during his life, which was left behind after his death, more than 100,000 bars of gold. But after this noble's death, much of his clan's history was lost over time and left behind. The amount leaves Hwa even more impressed with the man he was talking to, as just the weight of the gold exceeded 375 tons. Mangdeok asks if the boy would like to make a deal with him, and Hwa responds by asking what kind of deal it would be. The patriarch continues, saying that they were still powerful, but with their help, the protagonist would have a chance. Hwa doesn't understand what the elder is trying to say by telling him all this, and we hear another voice enraged saying that he desires the complete annihilation of the Sima clan. He recalls that every time he hears the word Sima, he feels this intense rage surface. He also remembers that the Sima clan is currently the strongest clan in the world, and the man's request seems impossible to fulfill. Being just a mere owner of an iron workshop, he tries to justify that there's not much he could do against them. The patriarch then mentions another name, who responds immediately. He asks if the person could teach martial arts to that child, referring to Hwa, who accepts the man's orders. Mangdeok then introduces us to Chiana, known as the God of the Sword, and we now see his silhouette, which is the same as the swordsman in Huck's book. Chiana was the only successor of the Sword Tomb, which makes Hwa remember that his brother had told him a story about it before. He then calls another name, Ganga, asking if he could teach the secret meridian release technique to the boy. Ganga replies that it would be possible if his clan had not already fallen and succumbed to darkness, which pleases the patriarch. Hwa is impressed with how extraordinary his descendants seem to be, while we see Chiana speaking to the protagonist. Chiana tells the boy that he has seen his world and that his knowledge and culture are of great value, which the current era cannot fully comprehend. Mangdeok then makes a proposal to Hwa, saying that if they combine their power with his knowledge, they could destroy their enemies, convincing him to accept. Moving to the next day, we see Hwa walking down an unfamiliar street, beginning to notice some differences between the worlds. Compared to his previous world, this place was much busier and more vibrant. As he walks through the city with his brother, we see some flags being held by people in a circle in the middle of a location, watching something. In the foreground, we see an older man in white robes also watching what's happening. His brother strikes up a conversation with the man, asking if that was the Beijing Opera. With a friendly expression, the man responds by asking if he was a stranger to the city, as he hadn't seen that happening there before. He informs them that he comes from Bangtae Prefecture, which is a place farther away, while Hwa takes the opportunity to introduce himself to the elder as well. We see the street play telling a story that doesn't seem important now, but may have clues about what we might encounter in the future. We see the Southern Crimson Jade Demon and the Celestial Sword Warrior. Hwa begins watching the play while recalling what he had previously studied about the Celestial Sword Warrior, who was an idol of the people of Anhui. This impresses his brother, and we see a fight choreography happening as everyone watches. Beside them, 3 men in white appear and start criticizing the story being told, stating that it was actually someone else who defeated the demon. The hero of that story was actually the Celestial Thunder Swordsman, and this should have been reported in the martial arts journal earlier. One of the men responds that the fools in that city wouldn't be able to read sacred texts like the martial arts journal, causing the two to laugh. The people, upon hearing the men mock their city, become angry but do not challenge them, feeling fear upon seeing their faces. But one of these people decides to confront the men, and that person was Hwa's brother. The great Hyuk, enraged, asks what kind of nonsense those 3 were spouting, which makes one of them angry and asks who he was. At that moment, Hyuk pulls out his book, showing it to them, and says they are dedicated readers of the Windstorm Martial Arts Journal. He proves that, in fact, it was those 3 men who were distorting the facts based on what had happened. He continues the story, telling how when the Celestial Sword Warrior returned to his family after disappearing for a year, he had red palm marks all over his body, indicating he had used a technique that proved his version. He also says that even after being mortally wounded by the demon, he managed to regenerate and come back to life thanks to that technique. saying it was something everyone already knew. While we see one of the three men looking to the side, he remains silent. Politely, Hyuk says he respects the strength of Jibul Yuwon, but in the end, no one is perfect, and his brother realizes he is indeed a martial arts nerd. Hwa remembers that Jigul was one of the 5 strongest clans on the continent, and that his brother was speaking without considering the consequences. This makes the three men furious, who begin to confront Hyuk's statements. They tell another version of what really happened and start saying that Hyuk didn't know anything. Hyuk, outraged by what he's hearing, responds once again, countering everything the man said with another part of the story. We see the elder laughing at the situation as if he were proud of Hyuk. The three men glare at Hyuk, demanding that he take responsibility for the things he says to people. Hwa then interrupts, apologizing for his brother, saying that he was a bit crazy, and that they shouldn't pay attention to what he says as they walk away. We then see the evening approaching and the two brothers sitting at a table with tea served, continuing their conversation. Hwa remembers that he had promised not to do anything crazy and to stay quiet during the trip, asking his brother if he wanted to go back home. The protagonist then begins to give a long lecture to Hyuk, who listens with his head down, unable to say anything. We then see Jeonja appear and Hwa calls him over to his table, addressing him as Hyungnim. Jeonja approaches, asking what had happened between the two, but Hwa says it was nothing serious and asks him to sit down. He asks Jeonja to tell him everything he knows about the Namgon clan, and Jeonja replies that all the information is available in the martial arts journal. But what Hwa really wanted to know were the things that aren't told to anyone, like conflicts and cases of corruption that they try to hide. Unfortunately, that kind of information wouldn't be something a mere merchant could have, but he explains that it wouldn't be impossible to obtain. He says there is someone called the Night Butterfly or the Forest Under the Moonlight, who are excellent informants and might have the answers he seeks. However, it would be extremely difficult to make contact with them as merchants, and they might even be extorted. We learn that these two are legendary informants in the martial arts world, to the point that no one is really sure if they even exist. Hwa thinks and reassesses the situation, asking how long it would take to arrange a meeting with the Namgon clan. Jeonja explains that the number of people seeking contact with that clan daily exceeds hundreds. Because of this, the vast majority leave without even being able to make contact, and he explains how the token system works. People who are part of the government have gold tokens. The middle-class population receives a silver token. Those with contacts within the clan, such as family members and kingdom distributors, receive a bronze token. Warriors receive a red token, and finally, merchants trying to finalize a new contract or seek the kingdom's sponsorship receive a blue token. John Jay tells us that when his father used to meet with them, the average waiting time for a meeting was about a month. Hwa thanks his partner for the information, who apologizes for not being able to help this time and asks what Hwa plans to do. Our protagonist decides to wait in line to be served and says he plans to leave the next day. His friend wishes him luck as we see the day pass in the following panels. Continuing the story, we see the brothers in their room. Hyuk gets up to train in the morning while Hwa starts hearing the Crimson Jade talking to him while still lying in bed. They ask Hwa when they are going to the Sword Tomb, and he responds by asking if they really need to go there. Shuna appears, explaining that those who do not have experience in the Sword Tomb cannot be taught by him, and scolds the boy. Hwa replies that he wouldn't be able to go right away because it would take some time to get there, and he had some unresolved matters in the area. Shuna shouts for him to be quiet and not to undervalue the teachings of the sword art that he possesses. He angrily declares that he had been the god of the sword and some other things, while Hwa visualizes the entire route he would need to take to the location crossing 2 territories. It would take about 5 months if the journey had no issues, which would end up costing time and money. But even so, he couldn't afford to miss learning that at some point because he saw a certain value in that knowledge. He says he will go as soon as possible to the tomb, which makes Chiuna ask when that departure would be. He responds that he would need about 2 months, which doesn't please the swordsman, who starts complaining and urging the boy to hurry. Saying that there were no other options left, we see a purple energy surrounding Chiuna as he begins to do something with Hwa's body. He explains that he is amplifying the energy and taking control of his body temporarily. Hwa begs him not to do it, but it's too late, and we see Chiuna complaining about how pathetic that body is. He uses a skill called Innate Ki, and an explosion of energy occurs in the following panels. We now see that Hwa has a different aura than before due to what Chiuna did with his muscles and Ki meridians. With a fearful expression, Hwa says that from what he knows, if a person uses their innate Ki, it loses vitality in exchange. Chiuna replies that yes, but it wouldn't be a problem to lose just 10 years of life. Hwa, upset with Chiuna's decision, asks if he wasn't being a bit careless with a body that didn't belong to him. Chiuna responds that he doesn't need to worry about that if he masters the sword arts completely, then returns control of his body. He begins to feel pain throughout his body, falling to his knees on the ground while a voice from within the Crimson Jade complains about his fragility. Due to the significant energy consumption, the spirits tell him they will be absent for a while, asking him to take care of himself in the meantime. We then see Hwa unconscious on the ground after a brief passage of time. He looks at his hand, sees a yellow energy, and begins to question it. He could see his energy and his vision had instantly improved, allowing him to see everything more clearly. He notices a ball of yellow energy in his chest and swings his right hand, imitating the movement of a sword, which works perfectly. At that moment, he understands why his brother was so fascinated by this and begins to wonder what his limits might be. The day passes, and we finally see Hwa and Hyuk going to meet the Namgon clan, only to be confronted by a crowd of people. Hwa signs his name on the waiting list and begins to wait his turn with his brother. We see various people at the tables around the place, and Hyuk, amazed by everything, notices that even the regular guards there seem quite strong. Hwa asks what he could do to shorten the waiting time, just as the same elder from the city approaches them from the side. The elder strikes up a conversation with Hua, who apologizes for not being able to say goodbye properly the day before. They look at each other, and the elder asks where the hall's representative is. The representative arrives, and the elder orders him to give gold tokens to Hua and Hyuk, sending them directly to the main hall. Not quite understanding, Hua asks the elder why he was sending 2 foreign merchants there. The old man responds in a more authoritative and aggressive tone, explaining what happened the previous day. He tells how the two had challenged the Jegal rebels and defended the honor of the Nambone clan. The young man then obeys the orders, and we see the 2 brothers happy that they no longer have to wait so long. While waiting in a private room, a maid asks if Hua would like some more tea, which he declines. Hua begins to stare at a painting, and a voice from the jade asks if it isn't a work from the Yingsu generation. Hua, remembering that the Yingsu generation's paintings come directly from the Bronze Age, asks if she might be mistaken. Mang Deok interrupts the boy, asking how he dares to doubt the eyes of Jo Yu, who was a great scholar of Hanlim. Hua apologizes as Jo Yu continues to speak about the painting, its name, and the techniques used to create the work. During the conversation about the painting, the elder hears Hua say the name of the work and its details aloud, causing him to drop the teapot and break it on the floor. He is quite surprised, and we see that throughout his life, he had never been as astonished as he is now, asking who Hua's art teacher was. Realizing that he had been speaking aloud, Hua hears Jo Yu say that there would be no problem in responding to the man. He just needed to inform him that he was a descendant of the great sage Cho, which was his nickname in Jianghu, and we see Hua repeat the instructions given. The elder is surprised to see in person a descendant of the great sage Cho Yu, who lived 300 years ago, while we see 2 new people entering the room. The 2 brothers enter the room, and Hua introduces himself to them. At first, they think he is a disciple of his younger brother, but he explains who he is. Interested in Hua, they begin to discuss among themselves how this man had all of his key passages open and yet didn't appear to be a fighter. One of the men grabs Hua by the shirt, pulling him close, and begins to wonder about a few things that don't make sense in the situation. Analyzing some details about how Kai worked in that world, we discover a few things. At the same time, Hua seems to be a pure master, but his body doesn't appear to be trained. Impure masters, after starting a process called acceleration, which was his case, could identify others who were doing the same as him. The man comments that with every passing second, Hua's acceleration was increasing, and that he had never seen anything like it before. We discover that our protagonist's acceleration would be complete in 3 years, and after that, he would become a true master. They praise the boy, saying he could become someone incomparable, even asking if he wasn't a natural talent. The milestone of ascension would be the next step, but only 7 warriors had reached that state before. After all this, Hua asks the man, who is still holding him by the shirt, to please let him go because he can no longer breathe. He releases him and asks if Hua does not intend to change his surname by inviting him to join his own family as his adopted son. Hua starts to consider the proposal to change families, but his ancestors within the Crimson Jade begin to curse the boy as a traitor and scoundrel. As Hua listens to the criticisms, his brother kneels, greeting them and asking to be given the surname as well, asserting his loyalty to them. While the ancestors within the Crimson Jade complain about Hyuk, a man praises him, saying that he was not so bad but declines his offer. Hua then interrupts both and says he cannot refuse the surname his ancestors gave him, apologizing and rejecting the offer. This leaves his descendants pleased while leaving the other man complaining about the new generation. The man in red robes shows us that Hua is the most talented he has seen in 500 years of life, deciding to keep him close. He invites him to become an outer disciple, and with the help of his descendants, they end up accepting the proposal in a joint decision. We see the day passing with Hua greeting his new master, who gives him some instructions on what he would need to do from then on. He vows to follow these rules while bowing in the presence of the 3 men who ask him to stand up. They then start asking questions about his spiritual energy without him being part of a martial arts clan. Unable to tell the truth, Hua begins to hesitate, but the man tells him not even to think about lying. He says it was impossible for him to reach that state with a body free of traces of martial arts training. Hua asks for help from the sword god, who does not respond, and the man continues his inquiry. He keeps citing some curious details while launching a shower of questions at Hua, who realizes the excellent perception of those 3 old men. He wonders if he needs to tell the truth to them as well, but the sword god can finally be heard speaking from within the jade. The sword god says he cannot claim to be his direct successor, but instructs him to say that he had a secret specialist helping him achieve that. The old men hear Hua say this, disbelieving the boy's words, which ends up making one of them angry. Hua apologizes but insists that this would indeed be the truth. The man asks Hua to prove his skills by demonstrating a bit of what he knows, which leaves him without a reaction other than denying. They discuss a bit more, and the man explains that everyone needs a master to learn those things. We can see the sword god complaining about the man who spoke incessantly and asking him to suggest a verbal martial duel. He explains that this would be the only way to gain their approval since he did not know martial arts. Hua follows his ancestors' orders, resulting in the start of the combat, where they loudly proclaim what they are doing and planning. They start to imagine and narrate their own actions, which makes the sword god irritated with the low level of the man. After a duel of 4 rounds, Hua manages to defeat the man who is said to be a celestial swordsman. And while the brothers debate whether the boy is truly just a novice, they are impressed by his performance. The man asks them to fight once more in the same style, and Hua asks the elder to take the fight seriously this time. We see that in the second fight, where both are taking it seriously. Hua needed only 9 rounds to defeat his opponent again. A third duel takes place, but this time Hua lets the man make the first attack to gain some advantage. But this does not prove efficient after seeing that after 5 rounds he had been defeated again. They continue this until the old man accumulates 13 consecutive losses and asks for 2 more weeks to train and have his next duel with him. The man departs at high speed for his studies while we see the sword god commenting on what he would do if he knew the truth. We then see his brother appearing unexpectedly behind him, asking what kind of monster he would be after all. After watching what had happened, Huck begins to wonder what kind of person that was. He could not believe that all his training and effort were nothing compared to what his brother had shown, and Hua interrupts his thoughts, saying he would explain everything to him at the right moment. One of the elders begins to think about arranging a wife for Hua so that he continues in the Nambone Kingdom and considers introducing his granddaughter to him. His granddaughter was known as the most beautiful flower in the Nambone Kingdom, and he could introduce her to him if he wanted. Meanwhile, the old man in white interrupts and says that, in fact, Soso Nambone is engaged, which apparently displeases the other elder. And before the man could finish mentioning the name of his granddaughter's future husband, he says he would not give his granddaughter to a broken monk. The day passes, and in the next scene, we see Hua deep in thought about having to wait there for another 15 days. He needed to leave to expand his business at his workshop and visit the tomb as soon as possible. As he wondered where Soso Nambone might be, he observed some instruments present in the location where he was. He began playing a string instrument that reminded him of his old guitar from university days in his past life, which is shown to the reader. But as he immerses himself in the sound he is creating, Soso finally appears, startled by what he had done. She apologizes reflexively, and she continues asking questions about how he had created that sound by playing 3 notes and creating a new harmonic note. She asks him to teach her how to do that, and he agrees, asking only if she could tune 2 more strings of the instrument. They start talking a bit about normal and harmonic notes while Hua teaches the girl step by step. Soso is impressed with what she is learning, while Hua also seems to be enjoying spending this time with her. In the background, her grandfather is pleased to see his granddaughter smile for so long, as it almost never happens. The girl asks if she can try what she just learned, and Hua realizes that she is actually more talented in music than he is. Soso's grandfather asks Hua what he thought of his granddaughter, and he responds by saying she was as beautiful as the rumors suggested. Embarrassed after saying that, he informs that he is leaving because he needs to meet his master. The day passes, and we cut to the evening, where we see Hua trying to talk with the spirit of the sword god inside the Crimson Jade. He asks more about what had happened to his body, and the spirit informs him that it used the celestial great sword cultivation technique on him. Hua seems apprehensive for not fully understanding everything, but the sword god manages to calm him down little by little during the conversation. Our protagonist discovers that this technique was compared to a divine art, or even to the origin art of the last martial god. The sword god explains a bit more about everything, and says that since the internal energy was forcibly injected into him, the side effects would appear soon, showing us that since it was extremely difficult to achieve, if Hua were to meet someone the same level, he would lose the fight. To resolve his lack of martial practice, he would need to quickly go to the sword tomb. And if he did not go there, it would be comparable to a baby who was born with the strength of an adult human. Hua says that after finishing his tasks at that place, he would immediately go to the tomb, and his ancestor responds that the sooner, the better. A few days pass, and we see 2 people in the next frame. The 2 are sitting in chairs facing each other, showing the older man with the blue sword by his left side. This older man was Hua's master, who asked the young man to perform the next move in the fight as if he were training. The tired-looking man narrates his combat actions, and the old man calls him a fool for using that combination. With a tone of superiority, the old man explains his next attack, resulting in a cut to the young man's legs, who, without much discussion, accepts his defeat. The elder, pleased with the result, rejoices while saying that this should always be the correct outcome with his victory in the end. And as he hears this, the other man says he can no longer stand training with him, as he had been away from his family for 2 days. But disregarding this, the old man continues to think about the moves Hua would make in the fight, showing us that the man is completely obsessed after his loss. He explains the conclusion of his reflection out loud and says that Hua was using the weight of the other person in his favor, and with the training scene ending, we close the chapter. It was obvious that he was saying he would establish a new merchant group, as they should not hesitate while they still had the sword plaques in their possession. His employee seems somewhat doubtful about everything that had been said and shown. The boss then asked a question about the profit of the Fire Dragon merchant group and was told that it would probably be the same or close to that of the workshop. He then revealed that the gain was double because the team had earned 1,000 gold coins from an investment of 60, which was an insane profit compared to the expenditure for the return. His employee then questioned him because he was a sworn brother of Mr. Jung, but was told that from his part, everything was already done, and that loyalty was enough up to that point. In the business between merchant groups, there is the rule of equivalent exchange, and that agreement, which only benefited one side, could not be maintained. The man had always warned him about this, but Jung never had the goodwill to make an attractive offer, so this would be the end of the joint business between the two. Furthermore, this company would only tolerate losses because of the ingots, and as long as they had the iron mines, there would be no possibility of loss or money deficit. The boss then told his employee that he wanted him to take over the merchant group, leaving him very confused. He then argued about the company's earnings and the distribution of items from the workshop. The employee frowned with a very thoughtful and tense expression. He then asked his boss for the sum of 1,000 pure gold coins. This request left the boss quite confused, but the employee explained himself as he had already calculated the profits 5 times and made several estimates regarding the products and iron ore they had, in addition to adding coins. And if the items produced in the manufacturing pavilion were completed, the sales expectation would be 700 gold coins. The boss responded by saying that he had forgotten about the weapon production warehouse. But that was because he himself had ordered the armaments to be of good quality, and with the knowledge of the best masters, it would take a while. The master then immediately asked his employee, after these arguments, the value would cost at the end of all preparations. The response was an absurd amount of 5,000 gold coins, but this was close to his estimate. The employee's boss didn't even seem surprised by all these values, even though they amounted to nearly 60,000 gold coins in a year. The leader then said that the new business could already be opened and was asked what kind of venture it would be. He then opened a large document. His employee quickly noticed that it was a map of Hefei, while his master thought about the small carriage they had previously been asked to develop. That thing was called a bicycle by him, and then he ordered that once ready, 500 of them should be immediately taken to the warehouse. His employee then asked about how long they would remain in the warehouse and when the sales would begin. He responded by saying that the time would be long and none of them would be sold. The employee was surprised by that information with a very puzzled expression. His boss then asked if he had never thought about how great it would be to have a food delivery service in the nearby inns. And this job would mean that a person would deliver the food to another person at their residence. His employee became very excited upon hearing this and realized that this was the business his boss had mentioned a few days ago. He had noticed that anywhere there was an open road in Hefei, the couriers could work and deliver any kind of food. He then showed his employee the blue points on the map, which would be the status boards for the delivery service. There, the delivery employees would be every day at a certain time and would receive the lunch and dinner orders from the customers. Payment would also be made at that location, and when they received the order, the employees would write the location and time on the status board. That man with the funny mustache was left speechless by his genius boss's plan. After the whole process, the employees would check the status board and return to the inn to receive the next orders from the district. The employee then asked his boss about the bicycles. He was told that they made the delivery faster and were a revolutionary invention to deliver the food before it got cold. He was impressed by that and also asked about the 8 red points on the map. Those dots would represent all the inns. The employee then thought that the new type of business had no competitors because the bicycles would not be sold to other companies. But the production costs would be very high, and they would probably need to employ hundreds of people for the delivery service. Your boss says that they would make customers order even with the high price, leaving him quite confused. All the food there was tasteless and really had no flavor. Salt and sugar were very expensive and spices were rarely used along with a limited variety, making everything completely bland. So the boss immediately asked his employee to buy a large quantity of sugar and salt from Jangnam, leaving him confused. They were going to create a new dish that customers would fall in love with and buy, even if it was very expensive. The man's employee was very confused about all this and asked if he should prioritize the business instead of the workshop. He was told that he could indeed do so, and then he immediately said he would do his best. The wonderful flavor of the modern era would be presented to the people of the Central Plains. On another day, the sun rose in a beautiful place, in the territory of the Nambone clan, which had a huge staircase and many trees. This man in blue was the leader of the Nambone clan, Nambone Beg. Upon reading the scroll, he was impressed and doubtful about something. The Cho family's workshop possessed an impressive celestial sword plaque. He wondered about Hui and who this guy was because he had something very rare that was only issued 3 or 4 times a year. That item had been given to him when Nambone was on a business trip in the city of Henan, and who had gifted it to him was a mystery. It was insane because the statuses had been completely ignored, along with the procedures and rules. 3 months ago, he had taken in a poor young man, and now he had given a celestial sword plaque to an unknown workshop. The man in blue clothing could not tolerate this in any way. He began walking through his territory. He soon wondered why there was no one training there. It was peak training time, and the green and blue dragon brigades had simply vanished. He closed his eyes with a very thoughtful and confused expression, and then he wondered why there were so many people gathered right there. All the men saluted the great and majestic clan leader. The leader asked why the green, blue, and sun dragon brigades were all there. They explained that they were in the middle of a verbal martial arts tournament, which left him very confused, because he thought that was completely forbidden during work hours. But again, the brigades explained that the brigade leaders had allowed such an act, leaving him even more confused. He then wondered why the clan's system and tradition had collapsed and changed so much all of a sudden. He scolded them all, saying that the path of the sword was infinite and did not allow strange attitudes or jokes. A man with black hair tried to explain, saying that the brigade leaders had witnessed it with their own eyes, and he was immediately questioned about it. He then said they had reached enlightenment through verbal martial arts, in addition to reaching the Celestial Eye stage, leaving the leader stunned because it was rare and only happened when a person mastered the clan's sword techniques. Everyone became very excited and said they would do it too. The leader then thought that now that they had seen someone reach the ascension stage, they thought it was worth training in verbal martial arts and immediately asked a question. He discovered that the opponent in this verbal duel had been an inner disciple of the director, leaving him very confused about this information he had just heard. He then thought that since he had fought with an outer disciple, this could undermine the family's hierarchy. After some questioning, he learned that the person was a young master named Cho Huai from the Cho clan's workshop. He was stunned because it was that young man again. Cho Huai felt from afar that his name had been mentioned somewhere. Namgung then immediately called Ryan Ju, who quickly appeared ready to assist his dear and great master. He then asked him to find out everything there was about the Cho clan's workshop and Cho Huai. Back at the enormous and beautiful mansion, a large white hand was seen reaching out towards something. That old man then said that finally his huge busy friend had come to see him. The patriarch of the Namgung clan, Namgung Su, remained completely silent, not saying a word. He then said he had read the reports related to the verbal martial duel from 3 days ago. The two agreed that the results were very unbelievable. He had used a lower quality technique, the 3-element sword, and combined it with other styles, making it appear very elaborate and difficult, according to the old man. It had been by far the most perfect use of the weapon he had ever seen, and it was a level he had never reached until then. The visitor then asked if that young man belonged to his Mount Hua sect, as he was the Violet Dawn Sword Saint, the strongest warrior in the entire kingdom. The old man with gray hair then responds, saying that was not the case. This leaves him quite confused because he still did not know who he was. The man then lets out a deep sigh and says that he will understand sooner or later, and he hopes for his ascension as well. The man congratulates him on everything, making him very happy and cheerful. There among so many houses the sun rises, a person arrives and greetings are given. Comments about the swordsman of Hua are heard around, and even that Hua Siu Mayong was nothing more than a mere useless scoundrel. He is surprised because he didn't know that all the heroes of the Jagal clan would be there. A man asks him if he is well. This young man is the young master of the Jagal family, Jagal Woon. Once again, greetings are given to Hua Siu Mayong, and the one who greets him is the young master of the sword. Quickly, Hua Siu Mayong goes to greet Miss Namgung and compliments her a lot since it had been a long time since they last met. Jang Ho then scolds him because his frivolity seemed to have not changed at all. Hua says that since they were there, they would probably have a beautiful reception banquet. Jang Ho thinks that if it weren't for the clan's orders, he wouldn't even want to meet those fools who did nothing but spit on the name of his precious father. He then says that they would all leave immediately after eating. The man with the hair asks what that man in brown wants, and he is told that he wants nothing. Quickly, the girl thinks about the young master Cho. The discussion becomes frantic because the young man didn't want to reveal the secrets of his business. The man gets very angry because no matter what he did, the tips for opening his establishment were not given, and this could ruin all his plans. That man says he doesn't know where the young man is from, but he could see through all his intentions. Another person arrives, and it is the brother Jung who is greeted. He is very angry with everything that was happening in that place. The boy with black hair is impressed because the old man really worked very quickly. Jung scolds him because it was very difficult to find him, and on top of that, he had decided to start a business without informing him about anything. He tries to explain himself, saying it just happened. But this is tremendous irresponsibility. Because this had never happened in the history of business, a deal had been closed in complete silence in the dead of night. The other brother argues that business should not be mixed with personal matters. The two argue, but the businessman had already given his family members some chances to consider a new negotiation. All the money of the month amounted to at least 6,300 silver coins, and the man should know how significant that amount was. He is perplexed because his brother knew how much he earned working together with the workshop. No real family member takes 6,000 like that from less experienced people. To the boy in white clothing, these seem like the actions of a thief and not of a true brother, immediately being interrupted because his family member worked very hard to acquire materials. He reaches his hand inside his long white coat and pulls out something very bright and golden, leaving everyone there very impressed by all that. Jung is quite disappointed because the deal had truly ended. The man who started the discussion quickly apologizes to the young master for having been very rude earlier. Someone arrives with firm and heavy steps and immediately asks who that young man was and why the clan's plaque was in his hands. Komokui quickly introduces himself and says he belongs to the Anhui workshop. Then he is quickly asked to show the plaque. His sister immediately says that the young master Cho Hui was already a well-known person throughout the clan and that the emblem was probably legitimate, leaving him quite confused. Since he had just come out of isolated training, he probably wouldn't know, but later when he reached the main hall, he would understand everything. He then asks his sister if the young man had offered anything valuable to the clan, but she replies negatively, saying that his skills were truly formidable. He quickly becomes very thoughtful about all he had heard, because Shokui's hands were intact and his eyes also did not seem very impressive. So he quickly asks his sister if she wanted to deceive him because that man was definitely not a formidable and impressive martial artist. She then reveals that he had won all the verbal duels with their grandfather, leaving him very impressed and stunned. They had dueled several times and the old man was always defeated. So the elder ended up taking him in as an indirect disciple, and despite being an outsider, he held a well-respected position among everyone in the clan. His brother became very angry because he couldn't believe that this pig who hadn't learned any martial arts stance was an important and admired figure. She then asked him to return to the clan and see for himself, but he immediately reprimanded her. Cho Hui thought that since something was happening with his brother, it was best to stay around. He then said he would assume the credibility of the plaque presented, confirmed by Miss Soso, and would leave at that moment. Jung said he had been watching him for some time and felt honored to be in his presence, but he was quickly scolded for his greetings and words as Hui was leaving. He then asked what he could do for the interrupter. The man said that the plaque Hui possessed represented the name of the clan, and having it in his possession could not simply be ignored. Chun defended himself, arguing that the plaque was genuine and that Soso had already confirmed it. Jang Ho was representing the patriarchal name at that moment, and the young man would have to prove his worth. The very cute girl was impressed by this affront. The man with long hair remained silent, not saying a word. The other man with loose hair also stayed quiet with everything happening in front of him. A remarkable red orb appeared, shining brightly, saying that the child was quite interesting. And he was truly worthy of being proclaimed a true swordsman because it was very difficult to reach such a skill level at that age. No one had received such praise from the elders until now, and he seemed to like the boy a lot. He would thoroughly enjoy the destruction, leaving Cho Hui very confused and worried. The young man desperately needed to be educated by Jang Ho. The elder was quickly reprimanded as these types of behaviors were not tolerated there, but everyone was told to stay quiet because this was his true desire. He wanted a verbal martial fight right there without interruptions. The orb instructed him to say only what it said and not to add anything unnecessary. Cho Hui questioned him as the sword arts of Nambong focused on power and serenity, something the man did not exhibit. He also mentioned that his opponent was trained in acupoint blocking techniques, and while in the shadows he couldn't train any more martial arts. Although it was common for a swordsman to train their visual perception, he should not be so dependent on it. Jang Ho was impressed because his opponent knew all of that. He said that for the blocking arts, when you unleash power, you must be born with the necessary talent to feel it. There was a reason why finger arts were rare in Jang Ho, and aside from not matching the Nambong family, it also required a tremendous level of talent. Jang Ho became very angry with a furious expression after hearing from his opponent how talented he was. He immediately ordered the boy to shut his mouth. He was then retorted by Cho Hui, who said that he was too obsessed with unsheathing his sword, causing his arm to be in that state. Jang then asked what was wrong with his upper limb and was told that the right one was somewhat larger. The muscle in his shoulder was swollen, and when the acupoint at the gate of the cloud was developed, this was a typical trait of an obsessed swordsman. The marks of a rock that stands strong even during long storms were evident. He thought about unchanging rocks, the entire path of a great dragon that punishes the corrupt world while watching it, enduring all creation, was the path of the rising dragon. And the true nature of the heavens, which tolerated all evil despite being strong and oppressive, did not crush it. It was the celestial emperor. The emperor's path was entirely pure, and it would not return to one that had already collapsed, thought the boy. Cho Hui continued delivering words about the blue skies that looked down on the world with arrogance and the history of the sword belonging to the Nambong family. He spoke with great conviction and confidence, but he thought he was in trouble because after saying everything the sword god had asked, it seemed like he was going to get beaten up right there. Suddenly, the brash man intervened, saying it had been 400 years. Jang Ho thought his opponent was merely talking about the basic sword arts of the Nambong family, but he had lost sight of even the basics until then. He then wondered why he had become so obsessed and failed to achieve speed. Dozens and hundreds of variations of sword techniques had been used, including Hoi Young Dragon and Changnan So. To defeat him, he had spent the last 3 years training, pushing his entire body to its limits, but his heart had become more sensitive and brutal due to fear. He remained silent, not saying a single word for a while. Miss Nambong immediately noticed her brother's very formal words and was impressed. Jang Ho told Cho Hui that he had scolded him just like a family patriarch would, and he wasn't so blind, thus no longer doubting his abilities. Even based on the hierarchy, it was right to treat Cho Hui as a master under certain circumstances for the young patriarch. He was quite impressed because this was indeed the expected behavior for someone from the Orthodox sect, and it was truly incredible. He then told the young patriarch not to worry because his grandfather had forced him to become a disciple, and how he was treated didn't make much difference to him. That man observed from afar, thinking about how impressive it was that Jang Ho respected Cho Hui completely. And soon Li Zhengji introduced himself as his sworn brother, and also the third son of the Fire Dragon Merchant Association. He was somewhat ignored as the two new friends left the area thinking about what they would drink after all that unnecessary conflict. He then thought that his relationship with that boy couldn't end that easily. He quickly called Hui and asked for at least a small favor. He was scolded not to exaggerate things because even the accountants of the Fire Dragon Merchant Association received salaries. He quickly retorted, saying that Cho was up to 20 times faster than them. Hui then asked Jang for permission to resolve that somewhat embarrassing situation. He quickly analyzed several items in a document and all their weights. He quickly pointed out that if there were a total of 82 items in the purchase record, the value would probably be 4,873 tolls. His friend then thanked him for the information provided. Hui immediately asked about the increase in purchases that month and whether there had been an increase in demand at any location. But it was all just for stocking up because the value was well below normal. He quickly became angry with that man because he was very greedy, and for that reason, he remained a mere useless merchant. He mocked him and said they would meet again soon, and ran out of that place towards the door. The person who had been watching everything saw how ridiculous and ugly it had all been. Jang Ho arrived and politely invited his new friend to the table. But soon, Hui was interrupted by the man because of what had happened a short while ago. He didn't understand because, once again, there was something to be resolved. There were 82 items with different weights, as well as over 36,000 kilos of things and 30,000 rolls of fabric. He was questioned about how he had done the math so quickly, as it seemed like he was a calculation king. Even in the Jagle family, which had spent a lifetime learning arithmetic from a young age, there was no one who calculates so quickly mentally like him. Many questions were asked, such as the method he had used and whether any object had been used. This left him very confused because that wasn't what he had done. He wanted to explain everything, but it was modern mathematics and the man was treating it as if it were a superpower, even though it was something simple. Since he needed to give an answer somehow, he decided to try and ask his friend a question. This left him quite puzzled and confused as he thought about how to multiply the number 5 by nothing. but he hadn't considered that nothing could be some number before one, feeling even more lost. Because it was a strange logic for the non-existent to be a numerical representation. Moreover, numbers were based on something that exists, and nothing did not exist. Cho told him to just forget about that fake conversation. But the man became desperate, asking him to explain how all this would work. He quickly said that since it couldn't be multiplied, it remained the value of a simple nothing. He became even more confused because, in his logic, the number 5 would remain. His friend sighed deeply at all the stupidity he was witnessing in front of him. He then called him an airhead, making him even more confused than before. He tried to explain that it wasn't important to know any of that. Jang Ho provoked him because of his lack of skill in explaining things, saying it was definitely arrogant as it ignored other people's intelligence. This left him quite confused because just seconds ago, he was the perfect example of an honorable sect member, and suddenly he had changed. The man with long hair explains the existence of fanatical groups that only focused on the sword method, believing all other methods were useless. Jang Ho becomes very angry and refuses to associate with someone who uses nothing but words, as the life of a warrior who seeks only the sword leads to ascension. The two argue and mock each other. Soon the girl arrives, saying they were being very childish and should stop immediately. Suddenly, a man enters the place saying he couldn't stay on the sidelines and asking to sit at the table as well. Ko-wai is surprised by who this emblematic figure might be. He was certain this was the person he had seen when he visited the Hua clan of the sword sect. That young man was none other than Hua Xiaomyan. He introduces himself to the new visitor, giving all his information and details, making him a bit shy and causing him some discomfort. In his mind, he thinks that this little troublemaker didn't even remember looting all the money from the workshop. The young man flirts with the girl again, complimenting her. She then looks and says it's true. She hadn't had the chance to thank him before and quickly apologizes and expresses her gratitude for all the lessons. Ko-wei feels a bit shy because it was nothing, and there was no need for all that. The boy in blue asks if she had also verbally dueled with the young master. She says not everything is training, leaving him even more confused. All the lessons she had acquired were from the musical branch. Her brother is very confused upon hearing this information, because that boy probably had musical knowledge as well. He says he is merely a merchant working in a simple and small workshop. The man is very confused about who Cho Hui really is, considering all of his achievements, wisdom, and skills, meaning that man had been the greatest gain he had received in Hefei. A somewhat golden object is seen there suddenly. It was the Yellow Phoenix fan of that clan, and it signified a beautiful invitation to the boy. Out of nowhere, a hand slams down hard right there. Jang Ho is very angry about that invitation, leaving his friend quite confused. The reason for his anger was that the young master Cho held the clan's emblem and was not a fragile outsider who could be easily controlled and manipulated with cheap tricks. He is immediately challenged on his words, as the law did not forbid invitations for visits, and this was quite common at that time. Jang Ho becomes even angrier, even wanting to resort to aggression, and has to be restrained by those nearby. Cho Hui says he appreciated and was grateful for the offer, but he probably couldn't accept it at that moment. This made the inviter regret it all. Jang Ho remains silent for a few seconds, calming down a bit, and he says that the atmosphere had been ruined due to some people present, so he would buy his new friend a drink another day. But if everyone was satisfied, they could leave and it didn't matter much. Most would accompany his brother. Cho asks if there is any urgent matter, and he quickly receives the information that next month they would participate in an event in Huazhen. He had heard of this before, and it happened once every 3 years, featuring a lot of art and participation from various clans with several different areas. He is impressed with what he just heard. That ancient sword deity had told him that the tomb was located near Sumsiu, and that the Huasan clan was nearby the castle. So Cho Hui offers to go with them and says he would cover all the travel expenses. There would be no better company for him than them, and since he was heading there, he could enjoy Huazhen and meet various people from different clans. He is delighted because his attendance is permitted with all the pleasure in the world, and he doesn't even need to worry about all the expenses. On a bright and sunny day amid the green trees and towering mountains, the cavalry marches towards their destination. The two friends talk about the successful and giant businesses of that clan. Cho Hui had also heard about the famous savings bank in Hefei, but it wasn't just that, as there were various shops and inns, including the accounting office of Ji Yang under that clan's name. His friend is impressed with that information because it was one of the best accounting offices in Anhui, and the view of the place was unparalleled, attracting many tourists. The two compliment each other a lot and continue talking about their knowledge and the inns. The boy in red thanks him greatly, and then comments about the Mansu and Hongryu inns. Ko Hui is very happy because his simple compliment made that guy talk nonstop. Someone suddenly comments about a problem that was happening at that very moment. The obstacle on their path was that the bandits had raised their flags. The young master asked which gang was active in that area and was told that it was the colossal tiger thieves, leaving him quite confused. He had heard that those bandits did not have much strength among the 72 groups existing in the Green Forest, and those guys seemed to be losing their minds. His brother watched him and quickly disapproved of his wild and irrational behavior at that moment. He angrily said that he had heard everything the other said. His brother tried to make him understand that the enemies couldn't be that stupid, but he simply didn't get it. Cho Hui and the brown-haired one agreed, as even with tactics or brute force, the opponents had a better chance of victory, and the martial artist world was not so safe. The boy became very angry because that piece of trash was always comparing him to the airheads from the book. Jang Ho said that there were many confused scholars just like him, as well as bad guys wandering everywhere. Amid this fight, his brother asked them to look at the flag again because there was a red bear on it. There was only one bandit gang that had this animal as its emblem. It was the team of the famous kings of the forest, the Iron Bears, who were there at that moment along with their disciples and evil bodyguards. It wasn't one of the 7 great warriors, but rather someone with the reputation to rival them. Yang Ho's brother mocked him a lot because the situation was pitiful, and if he had charged forward like a chicken at that moment, he would have become barbecue. Suddenly, many men were seen jumping down from the hill just ahead. They were the squad of the Red Bear Gale. Monsters well known for being at the level of a full clan battalion with just one group. They were very wicked and were approaching with bold and fearless expressions. The Great Master ordered the Namgoon warriors to prepare for the battle that would take place right there. Suddenly, he advanced towards those enemies. He immediately ordered his team to kill them all without mercy. His brother allowed everyone to use the Jin Stone along with battle formations and divination spells. The battle at that moment was already underway. Many elements were driven into the ground, and they were being activated immediately amid the Great War. The young man warned his brother that if he found himself in danger, he would be allowed to return to the formation, even knowing that he might not listen. Chotwi was impressed because that battle was on another level with the advanced form of divination energy and teamwork. In other words, it meant that they all fully understood the divination energy spell, just as expected from the descendants of Kanming. All Namboon warriors were ordered to attack immediately without mercy, and suddenly, they were asked to stop the attack quickly. Out of nowhere, a huge shadow was seen nearby. An impressive man dressed in green arrived at the battlefield looking very imposing. Cho Hui observed him, very impressed by it all. The man immediately asked everyone to stop, saying everything would be resolved in a calm and peaceful dialogue. That impressive man seemed to be Chul Ung Pi, according to Jang Ho. But he was mistaken about that information. He had crossed the line and made the man very angry because that old geezer was much older than that boy. Then his brother immediately asked about his true age. The young man responded that he was only 17. Chulwi was astonished because he was just a year younger, yet he looked like he was in his 40s. Jang Ho called him a clown, saying he seemed to be trying to fool everyone there. The man got very angry and stressed because people always treated him like an old man, even though he was young, even if it was hard to believe. Cho Hui thought he probably didn't even wash his face to look in the mirror and see reality, and bandits probably didn't bathe anyway. Jang Ho told the man to at least lie convincingly and stop with the lies. The young man became very angry and asked if Mr. Kang would not help him with all this. Then the man said that this precious person was the top disciple of the great king of bandits, the young master Jang Il-ryang. But the boy, even with this explanation of who he was, became even angrier because that past battle meant nothing to him. Mr. Kang justified himself, saying that the information he had given was indeed true, and when he was about to state his true age, he let out a small laugh. This made the boy very angry and filled with rage. But indeed, his age was really 17. The boy then gets very excited because all the information he had given about it was true. The girl then becomes quite enamored with him, as she had a rather peculiar taste for boys. Soon, her brother arrives, very angry because the bandits were being hypocritical, wanting to talk like that after attacking. Setting up a formation required a lot of money, but what really mattered now was that the great disciple of the Forest King was there. Jang Ryang was very angry because he wasn't such an insignificant subordinate, but the brown-haired boy didn't pay much mind and only wanted to know why they had done that and if they intended to loot everyone. Mr. Kang said he knew it was foolish to start a conflict with the biggest clan in those mountains, and even knowing all that, they decided to attack, seemingly not recognizing that there was a Murim branch less than 8 kilometers away. The old man said he was merely following the orders of the Forest King, leaving the boy quite confused by this statement. The old man wasn't to blame as the actions were provoked by the foolish little 17-year-old boy. Knowing this, the older brother said he needed to speak immediately with the disciple of the Forest King. Right after that, he became very angry because he wasn't a mere subordinate, and it made him furious when people said that. Everyone stared at each other for a brief moment without saying anything. Then the leader said that regardless, the young master Jang had been immature and ended up threatening the group's integrity. They had been lucky because otherwise many people might have left injured or dead, and the Murim world was definitely no joke. The young master Jang tried to explain, boasting about the clan, saying they were proud and honorable, but they probably wouldn't want to talk and would prefer to fight, as that was their instinct as troublemakers. Jung Ho joined the conversation, saying that the warriors plundered women and children equally, being wicked and deserving of destruction. Everyone looked at each other for a brief moment without saying a word, and then the young master Jang Ho called for a mega fight with an emperor's attack. Cho Hui thought he wouldn't be able to stop them, and he quickly suggested a brief conversation, only to be completely sidelined. A question was posed to the young master, which seemed rather prejudiced. The most important rule in the 200-year-old bandits' code was that they should not raise their swords against those outside of Murim or the Merchant Guild. Mr. Kang immediately told the boy that those opponents didn't care about the rules and probably didn't even know such a code existed. After all, they acted this way because presenting themselves as wicked would generate motivation, as they couldn't send children to fight against strong warriors right away. The young master quickly said that all those pointless discussions should end because those roots of evil hadn't changed at all. Jang Ryang mocked him, calling him a big shot. He then said that if there was a single group of truly honest merchants in Jungwon, they should be revealed to confirm their wickedness. Jang Ho became very angry because the young man was trying to justify his atrocities, thefts, and threats. The young man retorted, saying that he had no moral standing to accuse him, as they acted like money-chasing prostitutes, harming others. The boy with long hair interrupted the argument, saying that obtaining things honestly was very different from acquiring them through banditry and theft. In response, he told a story about a rich man who was making a lot of money with his business but ended up being interrupted by some greater force. Jang Ho remained silent without saying a word after hearing this narrative. His opponent's methods might have seemed different, but they were as dirty and unjust as those he opposed. They parasitized the citizens, treating them like puppets. Jang Ho was furious after hearing these atrocities. They'd only robbed from the corrupt, and between the two acts there wasn't much difference because there was always someone selfish and hypocritical. Kyo Hwai thought that typically those muscle-bound types were foolish, but there was something different here. Because the boy's logic was indisputable, he sighed as if preparing to say something. And then he said that there was a big mistake in all those statements. Jang Raon asked what that mistake was, ending the chapter with a big cliffhanger. First of all, the code of conduct mentioned wasn't something absolute. He was quite confused upon hearing this. But he had said that the rules written 200 years ago were still considered true. However, 7 years ago, a rule had been broken during a raid on the government. The boy remained silent and thoughtful upon hearing this all of a sudden. The Anhui bandit gang, led by the well-known Bong Ta-hyun, used to beat and kill elders who tried to protect their rations, and his father had been one of those victims. Kyo said that during his research, he discovered that the code was not taken seriously beyond the mountains. Such occurrences were common in that region and definitely happened even more outside of it, making the codes of conduct fragile and useless. And even as they were talking, an innocent person could be getting robbed, invalidating the previous claim of equality. More questions and arguments were made by Cho Hwai to his opponent. In response, the young man argued that there were many like him in Nakrim. Secondly, the way of making profit, despite its similarities, had a critical difference. Those bandits did not perform good deeds or charity, unlike the Nambong clan, which was loved, respected, and appreciated by everyone. Hearing this, the young man became very thoughtful and silent. Jang Ho observed and listened with a happy and enthusiastic expression. But that didn't mean there were only righteous people in Nambong, and there were also those who used their power for wrong purposes and actions. However, all of them protected the people of Hefei, going through difficult times and sharing hardships together. That was the difference between the two. Cho Hwai thought that all they could do was hide, which was a useless philosophy, deserving death. Jang Raon commented that for all those reasons, he didn't want to become a bandit. He quickly began to take off his green robes. He didn't even know what that mantle represented. The leader had given it to him, and he only accepted it because it seemed sturdy. Surprisingly, he ordered Mr. Kang to inform the elder that he no longer belonged to that useless group of outlaws, leaving him shocked and perplexed. The young man then took a firm step forward. He immediately asked what he needed to do to become a warrior of the Nambong clan and switch sides. Mr. Kang became very angry because the young master had thrown the mantle disrespectfully on the ground and was about to abandon them. Jang Ho thought it was all nonsense, but the bandit was determined in his decision. Kyo Hwai thought that even with that physique and muscles, the young man was still a half-baked bandit. The boy in blue wanted to slip away, but Jang Raon was determined to join the Nambong clan. He quickly declared that he wished to be accepted into the group at any cost. Jang Ho stared at him silently without saying a word. He then revealed that bandits never stopped being bandits, not even with goodwill, no matter how much they wanted to. The boy became very angry upon hearing this and said he had never bowed to his former king 9 times on his knees. Jang Ho said that if he could obtain an official document from the forest king or a letter of recommendation, he would consider his entry into the group. So then immediately said she would recommend the boy, making her brother very angry. The young man celebrated and asked her to write it quickly before the man changed his mind. She would need to cut her finger to make the recommendation since there probably wasn't a pen or anything of the sort. The young master Cho Hwai found the solution, making the young man even angrier. Jang Raon was almost about to cut off the girl's finger. He was quite enthusiastic while all this was happening, but there was someone there who wasn't happy at all with these events. He was planning to make the young man rot in the depths of labor, but it didn't matter to him. After that, everyone was to move towards their final destination, the place they were initially heading to. The remaining bandits watched everything from the hill, utterly perplexed and impressed. One of them asked the captain if this was acceptable and plausible. The forest king tended to speak with his fists when he was angry, and these events were completely contrary to his orders. They then wondered what to do and what strategy to use, as they were terrified at that moment. But the decision was made. They would all follow the group to the final destination. The carriages and cavalry continued toward their planned destination. Since the young man had just been admitted to the clan, he couldn't ride inside the carriage with the others. Jang Ho thought that if it weren't for his little sister's terrible taste in men, he would have kicked that guy out already. A suggestion was made for him to walk, but it wasn't accepted immediately. A joke that was made wasn't funny at all. So defended and praised him a lot, but Cho Hwai disagreed with her in his thoughts. She tried to learn more about the new member of her team. He had 7 siblings in total, and she quickly asked if the second was Lee Raon. The parents of these boys had been quite lazy in naming them, as the youngest was Chil Raon. But not all of them were boys. The third one, for instance, was a beautiful lady. And probably, she wasn't around, because in fact her surname was Bong, and they called her Jang Sam Bong. The boy in blue laughed a lot at this immediately. The 2 young men realized that someone had noticed and agreed with each other. One of them quickly asked why the previous attack had happened and if there was a decent reason for it. He then asked for a favor, leaving them quite confused. He really wanted to participate in the event they were heading to, but he probably had no chance. So for that reason alone, he had caused all that commotion, and he apologized for it, with Cho Huai thinking hard about that useless little bandit. His brother soon arrived, saying that the boy was now the young member of the Nambone clan and should treat everyone with respect, understanding its importance. He then asked the ages of the group and was told that except for Soso, everyone there was much older. He was about to call them brothers since he was now a member of the Orthodox faction. He started to tease Cho Huai, who got very upset. He then mocked Jang Ho, making him furious and threatening him with his sharp sword. He also teased Jagal, who became even angrier. But the only one who wasn't bothered by all this was Soso. Night fell, and the sky was already filled with many stars. 15 days after all those events, the cavalry finally seemed to reach the final destination of their journey. Soso woke up feeling quite sleepy, saying she longed for a nice warm bath. Jagal mentioned that they were almost at the first meeting point, leaving his dear friend confused by what he had just said. He then explained that because the Hwasan clan was so large, if too many people arrived at once, it would turn into chaos, so everything had to be organized. His brother confidently affirmed that they were already there. They commented about the yellow flag of the Hienmu, and they would probably have to travel with those muscular lunatics. The new member of the team was impressed by these men, as even in the mountains there were no people like them. They wore golden bands along with yellow clothes that shone brightly. Ahead of them was the young master of the Habak Pang clan, a new king of the sword, Pang Gak, philosophizing about the symbol of a man, which in his opinion was the strength he possessed. The spear, in his view, was just a subclass of the sword. Feints and false movements were cheap tricks used by the weak. 3 years ago, he had lost to Chung Un So unjustly because he hadn't used his full potential and due to his opponent's underhanded tactics, which was his motivation. Lieutenant Jagal and Nambone had arrived, putting the crowd on high alert. They arrived with an imposing presence at that location. The boy wondered about this virile man. The man approached him and offered an arm wrestling match, leaving him quite puzzled. He accepted and quickly heard provocations from his opponent. It was all nonsense, according to him, as he furiously struck a nearby tree. The tree fell to the ground, its branches and leaves crushed into the soil. Its trunk would be the ring for their match. The two were already ready and eager for the battle. The crowd gathered around the trunk to witness the spectacle up close. Jagal and Shohui commented on the antics of these fools. And Soso was impressed by this silly fight. The fight was finally underway and about to begin. Both put in a lot of effort, giving their all. Something shone on the boy's golden fist. This gave Shin of Wang much more strength than usual. The boy was very angry because his opponent had just used Ki, calling it cowardly. All of the boss's employees were disappointed in him. They couldn't believe it and were quite disheartened. He then asked for a rematch but was refused. Cho Hui and the purple shining orb were impressed because the boy was a descendant of the Airheads. Throughout the many Murim clans, there were few that focused specifically on brute strength, and right there was a fine example. Cho Hui wondered whether brute strength was more important than internal Ki. There was no concrete answer to this question, and that's why it had been the longest debate since the beginning of verbal martial arts. The main focus was the balance between both factors, which was why they could not surpass the great, impressive, and talented Shaolin. Moreover, their biggest problem lay in their inferiority complex towards spears. Thus, they had an unhealthy obsession with the sword martial art. Based on the information Cho Hui received, he thought that all those techniques were just baseless rumors without any foundation. This was confirmed as Zhang Fi of the Chak Nation had trained his whole life to fully understand the use of the spear. It was a fact that swords had numerous advantages, but there were even more powerful weapons. The reason so many clans used swords in Jianghu was that most styles originated from techniques using the fist, and a spear was unsuitable for that. Even with this information from the purple orb, Cho Hui remained in great doubt. He thought that if a man called the god of the sword didn't believe in his own weapon, it would be hypocritical and make no sense. But that wasn't true, as the fist technique had revolutionized things, leaving aside the bows and arrows that were quite popular and widely used. Jiang Sambon and the Shaman clan incorporated his Tai Chai into the spear because it was impossible to harmoniously incorporate it into the sword. This all meant that the sword wasn't actually the most powerful weapon. It only had fame due to cultural effects. The boy with the headband asked Cho Hui if he really thought that little sword was better. Cho Hui turned around, startled, his eyes wide open. Jiang Ho immediately intervened, telling his brother to ignore those ridiculous and unscrupulous remarks. Shin of Wang didn't need to go to Manhwa to finish the fight from 3 years ago because it could be done right there at that very moment. Jiang Ho mocked him, saying that he had lost to the apprentice warrior of the Namgong clan and didn't have enough confidence for such a difficult challenge. Jekyll gave him a valuable life lesson, saying that life always had its ups and downs. The boy became angry with him and asked them not to get so close, slapping his hand. He had lost to that witchcraft last year and had been trapped inside the Palace of 9 Illusions for 3 consecutive days without even being able to drink water. Just thinking about it made him want to fight mercilessly. Jagal then asked him why the Dang clan wasn't there. He replied that they would be staying somewhere else, having left some time ago. He then decided to leave, as he was sure the Sima clan wouldn't participate this time. The day was clear with plenty of clouds in the blue sky. Some people were seen in the distance near a steep, tall hill. Cho Hui then wondered about the lives of these people. The black-haired boy mocked Shin of Wan. Shin got very angry and tried to retort but failed. Soso then commented that the next event would have to be hosted by one of the 5 great families. The cheeky boy quickly offered her a ride on his back but was completely ignored, receiving a harsh rejection. They then started a general comical fight. Jiang Ho watched it all with great disappointment, calling them idiots and weaklings. Then he quickly ran towards the top of a large hill. Shin of Wang said it would be a great battle. So everyone started running, not wanting to lose first place. The stairs were immense and very steep, leading to the top of the tall mountain. Cho Huai and Jaegel were impressed by what they saw. At the top of Mount Hua, there was an old man welcoming them and expressing his heartfelt gratitude and hospitality. Jaegel Woon then introduced himself, paying respect to the elder of the Mount Hua clan. The elder remembered the boy as did anyone who had witnessed the event 3 years ago. He then invited them all in to rest after their long and tiring journey. Many people were there at that moment. Everyone greeted each other with great respect and harmony. Shou Hui distanced himself from them and went to another corner of the place. He walked around with lightness and calm, surrounded by the large trees with pink flowers. He thought about how small, elegant, and peaceful the place was. The plum blossoms endured the dry, hostile cold, and when they began to bloom, it marked the beginning of spring with a unique scent. The boy in blue soon arrived, also praising the place greatly as he imagined things to do there. Shou Hui was surprised to see Zhang Ruan drinking alcohol, even though he was only 17. But it didn't surprise him much because such behavior was typical of a mountain bandit. That said, the boy wanted to know who Cho Hui really was, as he thought he was from Nanbang. Cho Hui replied that he was just a mere merchant, leaving the boy quite confused with this information. He continued with a series of questions and speculations about the merchant. He also said he was hungry after all the climbing, commenting on the difficult cuisine of Jianghu. Cho Hui also commented in defense, but his teammate disagreed. The young man then criticized him heavily, calling him a pretentious little bandit. But there was a twist in all of this, and Cho Hui had never experienced this kind of situation before, ending the chapter with a mysterious cliffhanger. Cho Hui was very surprised, thinking about what was trending in modern business when it came to gastronomy. It was fast food, a flavor at a low price produced quickly, and the biggest company of the time was McDonald's. He had forgotten all the modernity and was thinking only about developing central cuisine. He then put his mind to work, considering all the ingredients needed for the raw materials of the food, in addition to sides like ketchup and delicious sauces. He then quickly called his friend to start the business. His friend was completely confused, but he agreed, and Cho Hui said he would give him all the details later. Cho Hui thought about the simplicity of that boy's mind and how great it would be if the world were full of people with such simple thoughts. He then handed his friend a work contract, leaving him very enthusiastic, joyful, and excited. It wasn't anything special, and he soon made an offer of 50 silver bars per month. The boy was shocked because that amount was exorbitantly high. He questioned his new boss about the amount, who didn't hesitate to confirm the information. The former thief also asked questions about the new job he had just gotten, making some guesses. But all he had to do was stand right there, and he received this information with much shock and surprise. Cho Hui then told him he would learn much more over time. Someone arrived, and it was probably the strongest rising martial artist in Jianghu, the young dragon of Mount Hua. He wore a beautiful white robe and walked forward with an imposing presence. Cho Hui was impressed because this guy was truly different from ordinary people. The art of flourishing energy was well known, and the only energy arts that train the natural central energy were the taking cultivation technique. After receiving this information, Cho Hui asked if this technique was better than the Grand Celestial Sword cultivation technique he had learned before. The clan leaders then greeted and praised each other. The young dragon of Mount Hua complimented Zhang Ho, saying he was very impressed because his friend Sky had changed significantly. Even hearing this, Zhang Ho thought that Guy was the one he hated most on the face of the earth. But he was also a human who had fallen into the deep pit of arrogance. The celestial red orb said he had great talent and was now intoxicated by his swordsmanship, making him very dangerous. The god was furious with the Mount Hua sect present, wanting to fight them all. Cho Hui immediately reprimanded him, saying it was his body, only to be countered because those people could end up causing multiple deaths and a disaster in Murim. The young dragon had heard that the rewards given by each group were enormous, so he expected a good performance from everyone present. Jaegel greeted the young man, saying it was a pleasure to meet Chung Un, so as it had been 3 years since they last saw each other. The other also welcomed him and commented on the 5 great clans. The awareness of the 9 great sects remained the same as always, and that was wonderful. It seemed that the sense of authority hadn't changed, according to Jaegel. Chung Un so apologized for having offended him with his words, but even his apology irritated him greatly. The muscular man said the only thing that seemed to have changed about that brute who just scattered flowers everywhere was his nonsense. The boy watched all of this around him with a very mocking expression. So then greeted him, asking about the great rewards at this year's Young Dragons event. The prize would be the 7 treasures pill and the divine silent steps, because 3 years ago, the writer of the Bon clan had ordered it. The divine solar sword and the 10,000 years ice crystal would also be added. Everyone there was shocked, as these were mystical items that hadn't been seen since the Great Murim Wall War. And these were true pieces of information because the divine solar sword and the 10,000 years ice crystal were treasures of the Solar Divine Palace and the Northern Sea Ice Palace. Changnan so also mentioned that the martial gods clan had given these items as compensation for this specific event. Cho Hui was impressed because the boy was probably talking about the Sima group. Someone quickly asked about the participation of that organization with a tone of desperation, but was promptly answered in the negative, as they wouldn't participate this time as usual. Everyone there felt relieved by this information. Changnan so thought about the fear that people had of that clan and how they might think they could surpass the Huasan group. Cho Hui interrupted these thoughts, saying he understood everything. He harshly criticized the boy for his arrogance and intolerance, saying that a demon should not be allowed to grow in that sacred land of Taoism. The boy turned around, listening to this with anger in his eyes. That had not been said by Cho Hui. He simply couldn't resist the influence of the sword god who controlled his body. It seemed that the influence of the demon lord had reached the Mount Hua sect. The boy became even angrier upon hearing this from that pretentious young man. That amethyst demon god was the first to appear in Murim's history and was also the celestial leader of the diabolical divine symbol of ultimate evil. The honest sects called his martial arts the amethyst demon technique and considered it a curse because his body emitted an impressive purple light in the ring. But the sudden appearance of the Mount Hua sect's secret arts seems similar to the demonic technique, too familiar. Rumors had spread in absolute secrecy. The Mount Hua sect had even gone to different sects within Jianghu to verify the so-called divine technique. After a thorough examination, the wise senior Liang confidently stated that the technique was undoubtedly original, well-crafted, and contained not a trace of magic. Chou Nunso, after hearing all of this, said that Chou Hui was bold to bring up a controversy that had been resolved over 100 years ago. The god tried to fully take control of the boy's body, but the boy resisted, as that blessed body was his. Jaegel then intervened to put an end to the situation because the day was beautiful, and there would be plenty of opportunities to duel in the near future. Chou Nunso then asked the boy to reveal his true identity. Zhang Ho introduced him as merely a guest of the Namgong clan, still quite inexperienced. Chou Hui became very angry because, in just 1 second, he had been turned into a useless figure by the sword god, and he quickly tried to calm him. Jaegel said that since the greetings were over, everyone could go to their accommodations. Night had fallen over the mountains with a dark sky full of twinkling stars. Then the person was seen standing in front of a house amidst the darkness. The man said that finally the body had become efficient. He gazed at the darkness, with the bright moon in the dark sky. He planted his 2 large feet firmly on the ground, and took a great leap toward the sky. He was above the houses in the area due to the altitude, and he finally landed firmly on the ground with bloodlust in his eyes and great fury. Suddenly, Chou Nunso also appeared in that place. Someone was exuding a strong bloodthirst, and that person was the boy standing there. The black-haired boy stared at him for a few seconds without saying anything, appearing very focused. Suddenly, a sword nearby began to levitate, as if by pure magic, and it landed firmly in his hand. Chou Nunso was impressed because that telepathy technique was very difficult, and even a master wouldn't be able to perform it from such a distance. The boy with the sword then ordered him to prove that his strategy was truly worthy of a god. This made the young man furious, to the point of gritting his sharp white teeth, and since his opponent wanted to see so much, he would make sure to show him without hesitation, thus ending chapter 21 of this work with much suspense and doubt. As expected, Chou Nunso was using his life force to conceal his kai, deceiving everyone under the heavens. And his nature hadn't changed. The technique was definitely the 4th form of the twin flame. He became very angry, wondering how that little man knew about the trick of the twin flames. He wouldn't be able to block the blade using only the 4th form. The black-haired boy began to extend his hand, preparing his precise strike. All the magic bullets began heading toward his opponent. The powers of the celestial floating sword and the heavenly sword meteor were being used at that moment. Chou Nunso observed everything with total despair and anguish. His eyes expressed immense rage and anger. He then used his technique, the style of the 24 blossoming blades and 1,000 concentrated aromas. Despite all his magic, his opponent's attack was closing in. He looked at it in desperation and was hit hard in his body. His opponent had destroyed his twin flames, and now he had every reason to fight against his true self that had been hiding. He declared that the sword of Mount Hua would not be evil. The black-haired boy was still uncertain about this. Meanwhile, he did something with Chou Nunso's body. The blade's magic was drawing closer. Chou Nunso screamed in extreme pain and despair from the attack. Now he probably wouldn't be able to fight against the will of the god, and the divine truth of the body they hailed had to be revealed immediately. Chou Nunso screamed even louder at all of this. Then the black-haired boy ordered him to reveal himself immediately. His eye was purple like a glowing berry shining brightly. He shouted loudly for his opponent to shut up and cursed at him like never before. And then everything was revealed. It was an evil spirit, and warriors who supposedly dreamed of a peaceful life were devoured by those desires. The boy's clothes began to tear apart amidst so much blue magic. His eyes turned white and his blood was visible all over. Then, his body was held by the black-haired boy. He looked toward the front of the house where there was a huge purple shining orb. He then leaped from there, breaking all the tiles on the ground, leaving the place as if nothing had happened. The head of the Mount Hua sect of the 28th generation, the amethyst sword saint Dan Yang, was writing something on a scroll. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise. He broke out in a cold sweat and widened his eyes, looking tense and startled. He immediately ordered the presence of whatever was there to reveal itself. He lowered his head and tried to think for a moment. Something was wrong with that internal energy. The mental form shift was a legendary state that altered one's opponents. Dan Yang knew he had to recognize this sage. Suddenly, he widened his eyes again in alarm. He then had a vision of the black-haired boy killing Chou Nunso. He was desperate, wondering how a sage could do something so despicable. But the boy didn't want to hear that from a man who had infused demonic energy into his own disciple. The boy stared at him for a few seconds without saying anything. The boy told him that no matter how much he cultivated Taoism, he was still human and could be influenced by immoral desires as well. He tried to use his magic to grab 2 swords nearby. One of them began to levitate like a light feather and quickly moved toward the one who was attracting it. The boy said that if that old man were truly from the Tao clan, he should end his greed and suffer there for the rest of his mediocre and useless life. But instead, he dared to corrupt future generations as well. The old man's face twisted in agony as the intense blue light shone on his face. His veins had been destroyed just from the energy infused by the sword of the saint. The boy was like a god and could not interfere with the mortal world. Now this was a human affair, as an immortal was interfering with all matters. The boy was not a god as the old man thought, and he said it wasn't wise to meddle in such affairs. However, he claimed he had earned the right to do so because he had taken that body and would ask his junior once more if he was capable of giving up the demonic energetic desire. The old man was stunned and asked who in the world that being was. And then he heard nothing but a loud shout saying, "Die." He widened his eyes after hearing this. The entire building he was in began to split in half and collapse. A massive explosion was seen right there, and it seemed to grow larger and larger. The old man was in his final moments of life, his eyes wide open. And then he realized that everything seemed to be just a mere illusion. The boy issued several warnings about his actions as well as many threats. He then thought that in all the history of Murim, there had only been one swordsman who displayed such divine power, and he was the celestial warrior with no weaknesses. He immediately thought of the god of the sword. Despite the boy's warnings, he continued to be intoxicated by demonic energy, unable even to grasp the teachings of the Manhwa sword. The scent of the dark plum blossoms alone was enough to sustain his arrogance, and he would only achieve true enlightenment by abandoning the eagle he carried. The old man then began to hallucinate, thinking of the dark plum blossoms with a golden orb near him. In the dark night, the remnants of that orb glowed. Many fragments could be seen without any effort. The orb was on the old man's chest, surrounded by various lights. He firmly closed his eyes and began to focus on all the magic around him. The boy said that the dark plum blossoms had finally bloomed. The old man started crying heavily, filled with confusion about what was happening. Something was different about him. It seemed like a new beginning, with nature honoring the general. His ancestors' teachings from Manhwa, practiced for the last 300 years, had finally darkened the plum blossom. Now his transcendence was clear and could start anew. Dan, Shi, and Yang asked if the boy was truly the god of the sword, ending the chapter with suspense. The boy stared at him without saying a word. The old man thanked him for his teachings and for saving the Manhwa sect, but no one was there to hear him. The boy had vanished, leaving someone else in his place. The old man's hand reached out toward that person. He then apologized to Chung Un-so. The night had fallen with the bright moon shining in the dark sky. Meanwhile, in that quaint little house during the night, God was the pride and dignity behind a single word. He had destroyed the Manhwa sect with just one sword and defeated Chung Un-so and the group leader with sheer willpower alone. The boy wondered what an army could do against the sword god, who could bring an entire clan to its knees with just one blow. He needed to persuade that divine being never to roam the earth again, because if there was a demon in Manhwa, it was Chohui's demon. In that place, amidst a mountain and trees, the old man proclaimed that the young dragon gathering was beginning. Jang Ho was very optimistic and wondered where Chung Un-so was. The newcomer then arrived, bothering his new brother. This made him quite angry, as it seemed disrespectful. Cho Huai then asked Jagal about the 10,000 years ice crystal. Jang Ho, in the middle of the conversation, said he would explain everything. Jagal became very annoyed and told his brother to do what he was doing alone. He then began explaining to Cho Huai that the 10,000 years ice crystal was a treasure of the Northern Sea, symbolizing healing and being a true blessing. Cho Hui asked what that item looked like. According to speculation, it resembled an ice coffin in which a person could lie down and train. Cho Hui was impressed, thinking that the lucky one could possibly possess ice arts forever. Jagal confirmed this, but said that according to the Northern Sea myth, it had been over 10,000 years since it had disappeared. Cho Hui thought that the item matched its name and quickly asked what category it was listed under. But Jagal wasn't sure, as the rewards were decided by the sponsors. Jang Ho started criticizing, saying that if one reached their limits quickly, they wouldn't be able to win against someone who put such thoughts into action. He then asked someone about the event's rewards. The young man greeted him and praised him. He said the reward for the winner of the duel competition was the Divine Silent Steps Manual. In addition, the Divine Solar Sword would be awarded to the person who achieved the best performance. Cho Hui said that was great, as it would be difficult for someone like him to win. And regarding the 10,000 years ice crystal, it would be awarded to the winner of the theoretical battle, which he didn't know about. Jagal explained that it was a field where people debated, competed with calligraphy, and evaluated art. Cho Hui became excited and immediately asked how to participate. The brown-haired boy tried to calm him down, saying the battle didn't have a fixed schedule and could happen at any time. He then discovered that the previous year's winner was the very person he was talking to. Cho Hui quickly thought that he was mediocre at drawings and writing, so he needed to use the knowledge of the elder Sangjo to focus on an ideological battle. Suvin, the young man, said it looked like everything had already begun. A strange man called for his opponents. Jagal volunteered to fight him again and see if he had improved. So suddenly appeared, saying she wanted to participate, leaving him astonished. And she let the challenger choose the topic. She wanted it to be about the 5 vermin of Hanfizi, as they were said to destroy an entire country in the books studied by many scholars. The young man was very angry with the girl's decision. She argued that there was no better topic for debate if the intention was to criticize Confucianism, making him even angrier. She was certain that everyone knew about the utopia of the ideas that had led to countless failures. Jagal pointed out that this was a good reason why Emperor Qin couldn't last 20 years in power, recommending a change of topic. The boy prepared to say something. He then stated that everything was related to the fact that laws had only been used as a means to control the population, which led to the monarch's downfall. The application of laws to all positions and people was the great principle of Qin's government, argued Jagal. But that was impossible because the emperor was hypocritical, severely prohibiting adultery. The caller of the battle became very angry, saying that the king could not be compared to the common people. Cho Hui responded with a mocking tone, further angering the boy. He spoke about humanist thoughts, emphasizing that all people are equal. His arguments were well-founded because both individuals were humans, not animals. Hegel added that according to Confucian ideas, a country is a big family, and the Son of Heaven who performs rituals is the father of all and also the guide. But Cho Huai argues further because from his point of view, that was the reason why Confucianism was criticized, besides the distorted values. Everyone there seems a bit lost about the subject. In other words, the conception of a king or an emperor being the father of a nation was being used to justify the special treatment they received. Cho Hui asks if the ideology of the Son of Heaven could coexist with that of the people, so that the idea of equality would be established and should not be divided between the emperor and the rest of the world. Otherwise, it was like talking about different races. Sorso goes along with him, confirming everything. What it caused the empire's laws to break was the fact that they were applied differently depending on the individual's position. That guy is impressed and assumes something. The problem with punishments was the extent of them based on the acts committed and whether they would be applied equally to everyone. And that's why the law should divide crimes between minor and severe, and the principle would be efficiency. Everyone there is perplexed by these ideas. But what would be the standards that would decide if a crime was minor or severe? Cho explains that it is the state's decision. He would say that crimes threatening life were severe and others minor. Hegel thinks that all the ideas were just about governing with the law, but intertwining with people's ideology. Minor crimes should be divided between physical crimes and non-physical infractions. The first would be fined and imprisoned, while the second did not yet have a defined measure. The tree looks beautiful with its pink flowers on that sunny day. Cho Hui says that everyone should have a vote and use it to elect authorities, while the country should ensure effective leadership. He then thinks that perhaps he has spoken too much and should stop. Hegel thinks about people becoming the country's agents. He didn't understand much about political rights, and it was very dangerous to give this power to the common people to choose a king who would govern the nation. The guy agrees because many commoners didn't even know how to read and probably didn't understand anything about politics and relayed the ideology of being chosen. It was arrogant to think that everyone was foolish just because they were illiterate, and that didn't mean anything. Because even the uneducated in rural areas knew how to respect their parents as well as the concepts of love, bravery, and charity. And it was bold to call them ignorant and label people as stupid when they struggle to be taught. It's a poison to be avoided. Cho Huai then thinks that even though he was the one who said it all, it seemed pretty cool. The guy gets really angry and says he wants to compete in calligraphy, leaving Cho Hui nervous and feeling doomed, thinking he must surrender his honor so easily. The old man with the giant beard says he would take care of everything. Cho Hui feels very relieved and asks him to go ahead. The bright red ball then appears, and he starts thinking about what he would write. Hegel says that he would also like to compete, and the topic would be the first page of the songbooks, the great song of the kingdom from the decade of Wen Wine. Cho Hui thinks about that time, and asks if he could borrow a brush. Hegel orders the equipment to be brought immediately, and his command is followed. He sincerely thanks for the gesture. Cho Hui then begins his work quickly. The tip of the brush glides like soybean oil on that paper. Everyone watching was stunned. Hegel wonders how someone can achieve such a level of knowledge and skill in literature and arts at 20 years old, as it was almost impossible. He lost the battle, leaving everyone amazed as he hadn't even lifted the brush yet. The boy in black also surrenders, asking for his opponent's identity. He was very focused and thoughtful about his objective. Out of nowhere, he says his name is Refrigerator. The boy calls him Fridge and says he truly understood that there will always be someone better than himself in the world. Cho Hui then reveals his true name because his name wasn't really Refrigerator, leaving him a bit confused. The sun was already setting at that place. Night soon fell. The white-haired boy thinks deeply about something very quietly. His master then arrives, asking if he was okay. Then the little boy starts crying a lot. His leader comforts him because there was no reason to hold in all the anguish. He knew how it was for a martial artist to lose all his inner strength, but the boy says they weren't Namgung's techniques. So the advice was for him to forget everything and not think about who that man was that harmed him beyond revenge. He says he will train until he can no longer stand. His master looks at him without saying anything. An orange light suddenly appears at that place. That was probably the materialized sword, as the highest level had been reached. The smell of plum blossoms was also noticeable. Dan Qian-Yang says that even with that technique, he had managed to defeat that mysterious opponent, leaving the boy perplexed upon hearing this. He then explains that the man was closer to a god than a human and grudges could not be held. The sun was already beginning to rise in the city. A huge hand slams hard on the table. Zhang Ho learns from Jagal that someone had given up, making him very angry. That guy was a coward for running away. Chobai thinks that the sword god had used all his maximum power and the breaking of the spirit was obvious. Changmenso arrives, surprising him greatly, because he had recovered very quickly. He apologizes deeply for withdrawing from the competition and explains the reasons for it. Zhang Ho questions him about what reasons could be so significant. He then informs that there was something wrong with his Kai, making his opponent deduce something. But it wasn't something as extreme as energy deviation. He explains his enthusiasm for the day of the battle, and that he was not avoiding his opponent because surely he would fight in the next encounter. A hand appears, touching his shoulder. Chohui consoles him, saying that things in life happen when you least expect them, and preparation is essential. Chumnan so gets angry because the guy touched him, leaving the boy puzzled because he only wanted to help while the other just wanted distance. Everyone there is stunned as they observe this, and they look at Chohui with a very confused expression. Jigalin asks what he had done for Chumnan so to act that way. Chohui explains himself, saying he did nothing, feeling quite offended by the question. Jigal was sure something was going on there. The guy in yellow suggested beating, but it wasn't Chohui, it was the sword god. He hadn't done anything at all. Jang Ho couldn't understand any of it. That guy was a genius who fought against the clan chief and won. a musician capable of mesmerizing So-So, also a mathematical genius who could dominate Jaegil, a thinker capable of bringing various questions to scholars, in addition to being a great writer who moved others with his words. But who exactly was this guy? Xiuhui says he would be leaving the mountain at that moment. Jaegil is surprised because it would be very sudden. Jang Ho mocks him, saying that the duels hadn't even started and the guy was already running away in fear. He then says it would be obvious his lack of interest in seeing him, as he wasn't crazy, leaving him very confused, because it wasn't what he expected. And soon he says that there are things you can learn even without participating in the fights. Xiuhui then walks towards the guy sitting at the table. He then calls him Manager Jang, leaving him puzzled. But this title was used because he was in the middle of business, and it was part of the work contract. He then takes out the document from his clothes, and sees that it was probably a ranking confirmed by his boss, who also mentions the possibility of promotions and salaries. This makes the boy very excited, while he wonders if that little boy would keep smiling when he learned about his duties. He instructs him to settle in the Nambone clan, as he didn't know when he would return to Hefei, and letters with all the orders would be sent in the meantime. Jang calls him brother, but is immediately reprimanded because Xiuhui was his boss. The two are very happy with the new titles. Xiuhui then thanks everyone there because many lessons were inherited, and Jang Ho agrees with his departure, saying that their reunion would be in Hefei. But he asks about the 10,000-year ice crystal, leaving the boy deep in thought because he wouldn't be able to carry something so heavy and large on his back. So Xiuhui makes a request to the Nambone clan, which is accepted by the leader, but they needed to authenticate a person to receive the item first. Jaegil immediately commits to this, leaving the little boy very grateful. Amid the high mountains on a cloudy day, he was in Shaanxi in Gangwon County. He calls upon his sword god, because the divine being had been silent for 3 days, and it would be very difficult to know where the sword tomb was. Suddenly, a foot stomps on the ground with extreme force. 3 intimidating men are spotted. Xiuhui runs, very scared and tense, but those guys were very familiar. They looked like the Red Bear Wind Squad. The guys realize he identified them because of their huge muscles. They then remove their masks, ordering the boy's death, but he asks for a moment of calm. Even so, the Wind Squad wanted to silence him to avoid a nuisance, leaving the boy very confused because he didn't know what was happening with them. The guy in green quickly tries to punch him to shut his mouth, but he was also prepared to strike back. Their fists collide in midair. The old man is surprised because that brat knew how to defend himself. Xiuhui criticizes their cowardice and only wanted to end everything with a civilized and calm conversation. The bearded man wants to put an end to it. He commanded all those men. Xiuhui watches him, very tense and worried, widening his eyes. He had met the squad leader again, feeling very shy about this unexpected reunion, admitting that the man had a lot of courage because Shaanxi was full of warriors belonging to honorable sects at that moment. The leader says that the martial arts gathering in Huozhen was more than 40 kilometers away, so no one would come to the boy's aid, even with his screams. Those bandits were stupid and surprising for harboring so much resentment. Xiuhui was a guest of the Namgong clan, as well as the owner of the Celestial Sword, who would defend him fiercely without hesitation. The man makes a fierce and fearful threat to him. He then thinks about how that violent sect of bastards could speak such brutalities with mere ease. He quickly asks the old man if all problems would disappear by killing him. He tries to talk to them, bringing up plausible topics because that proposed resolution method was very rash. An employee asks his boss when he would put an end to all that boy's chatter. He quickly throws a silver coin toward the ground. The guy in green notices it and quickly runs toward the coin. The sound of money is enough to stimulate those bastards' brains. That guy with an axe gets angry at the boy's antics, but he quickly runs after another coin that had been thrown. They all receive a massive scolding and moral lesson from the boss. Xiuhui had a golden coin as his trump card. The leader tries to control his desire for that money but can't hold back. Xiuhui quickly throws the coin to the man. Then he asks what he wanted at that moment. The boy immediately says he would give all the silver coins he had if they let him continue his journey in peace. The leader agrees to all of it, and his employees quickly question him about payments. They are all impressed by the amount of money there was. Xiuhui then quotes a saying from Confucius, stating that the revenge of a virtuous man does not last more than 10 years. He feels a bit regretful because it had only been 3 days since he disrespected all the philosopher's teachings, never knowing what life would bring him. The divine being suddenly starts questioning him out of nowhere. He quickly asks for permission to lie down right there, and the foolish guys with the money allow it without thinking twice. But those idiots would certainly see him again. He then begins walking toward his destination. The divine being declares that he would never again take control of his body. He had been listening to everything like a pervert and should rethink the balance of power. The boy then asks him if he was sulking because everything he said could have caused an uproar. But the divine orb simply responds that they should head toward the Autumn Valley. The boy feels a bit confused about the path, but all the instructions are quickly passed on. He wanted the divine being to use his body so they could fly there faster, but he is given a negative response. Feeling very sad, he reluctantly accepts the decision, hanging his head low. The mountain he had to climb was huge. He makes an immense effort to reach his destination. It was definitely beyond limits, and figuring out how to climb it efficiently was quite a mystery. The divine being soon urges the boy to hurry, as the sun was about to set. He gets very angry because all of it seemed like a form of revenge just because of a few insults, and this suffering was intentional. He is quickly scolded by the god, receiving a harsh moral lesson. He then starts thinking about all that money, and gains more motivation to climb the hill. One of his feet slips on the smooth rock, causing him to tumble down the hill, screaming loudly. He finally falls to the ground there, and realizes he had returned to the start again, feeling very angry and impatient with this. So he plants both his hands on the rock again with all his strength, and begins climbing the hill, his anger transformed into motivation. All that rage was the fuel for his ascent. Finally reaching the last inch of the hill, he finally reaches the top of the mountain as the sun is setting. He wonders if that is the high grave of the sword. The divine being responds affirmatively, stating that whether he would obtain something there or not depended entirely on the boy, also offering him advice. All that information suggested that someone was right there and some traces still remained. The boy feels a bit confused, but the god explains that the things he discovered in the high tomb of the grave were marks of blades with true essence. Kyo-hwai says he's just a normal person, thinking his divine being wanted him to become a supreme master just by looking at a few scratches. He gets very angry because whoever made those marks should be highly respected beyond mortal standards, as the boy was saying. He then asks if that being was a god or something like that. He is answered affirmatively, as those blade marks were the true legacy of a divine being that even as the leader of the sword, he had never imagined defeating him. In Murim, the word perfection didn't exist, but the god's swordsmanship was perfect. The question was how the son of a mortal man could demonstrate such mastery. Kyo-hwai then asks how good he was. He looks at the ceiling of the cave he had entered, and is told that he would have no chance. The sword god then asks if he was capable of reading ancient languages because he had made a copy for scholars, and no one had been able to understand it. Kyo-hwai is very impressed by what he sees, because on the walls were written various formulas and physical calculations with constant fall velocity and gravitational force depending on weight. The person who had left those traces was undoubtedly from the modern world and also Korean. The sword god is perplexed because the being belonged to the same world as Kyo-hwai. He then asks when he discovered that cave. That ruin had existed for at least 1,000 years, and a person from the modern world had already been there, besides the fact that all those researches should have been in history books. The sword god also wondered about this because it was really strange that such an exceptional swordsman had no name recorded in Janghu. Kyo-hwai asks about the last sword mark he had mentioned earlier. He is then asked if he hadn't found it strange, the terrain in the Kuhu Gorge. He quickly thinks that normally gorges have winding paths, but that place was flat. He discovers that Kuhu Gorge was the last sword mark of that god, leaving him perplexed and impressed. Because the single person had split a 5-kilometer high mountain using just a simple sword. He takes a step forward slowly. All those writings spoke of the techniques studied by the man and the time spent on all of it. Kyo-hwai thinks that this man was truly persistent, different from himself. On the 122nd day, the god noticed in his analysis that the technique of the Wudang sect leader had a distinguishing feature compared to others. It was capable of splitting the heart into two sides and using both energies, making it possible to create many more variables in mathematical terms. On the 139th day, he could only think about points, lines, and surfaces, as well as the curvature created by the technique. He was trying to change this, but his muscular strength wasn't keeping up, making him doubt himself until he realized the cause was the limit of amplitude. On the 181st day, he pondered about physics and whether there truly existed a human body capable of using these calculated values. What remained was to train his own body to be able to apply these formulas. On the 487th day, he realized how weak the human body was, trying to see how many attempts it would take to hit the points he had marked in front of him. The exact number was 7,264,220 attempts, taking 2 years to discover, concluding that a weak body would be incapable. After reading all of this, Kyo-hwai is impressed and astonished, doubting the mortality of the man. On the 4,685th day, he realized how foolish he had been to remove factors that physics could not explain, concluding that Taoism and Buddhism existed because only through physical training was it impossible to gain complete control of the body, requiring the study of the mind. Only in that world could he divide his body as small as particles or become as vast as the universe, finding peace. Only in that place could swords, lines, and all the movement of physics and figures be perfectly manifested. He realized that the boundaries separating the world and the mind had disappeared because even without eating or breathing, he did not die. On the 6,932nd day, his body was already capable of reproducing all physical forms perfectly. He could see the essence of everything like Neo in the Matrix, as if he understood all the laws of nature. There, whether he was still human or not became a question, as he could feel the constellations taking an interest in him. Kyo-hwai feels something in his body. It was an energy that gave him visions. The sword god is astonished because it had taken him 7 years to see the meteor, and the boy was sensing the star's magic so quickly. It was the supreme technique of the meteor sword. The divine being remained perplexed because the boy had sensed that meteor energy in just 15 mere minutes. Being capable of such feats meant that Kyo-hwai already had the final intent of the supreme technique imprinted on his soul, and he was far beyond being a simple genius. This was the fate that the heavens had reserved for him in advance, and the god was merely the bridge for this to happen. Unknowingly, Kyo-hwai fell into his mind's world for 3 consecutive years, and this was the birth of the little sword god. Outside that place, the sky was blue and cloud-filled. In the beautiful and grand city of Hefei, the young master of the Juksan clan mansion is seen there, waiting for a man on horseback who was already approaching. He then asked him to remain calm and cautious, because the celestial carriage was worth a lot of money, and it was necessary to handle it with care. The man apologizes and is quickly reprimanded. Juksan quickly inspects the carriage, and then climbs aboard, settling in to depart. His intention in buying the carriage was to reach a Hefei inn. On the way, he notices something that greatly impresses him. It was the sacred hall of the Cho clan. A girl then greets him warmly with hospitality and respect. He then asks for the 6-layer bread and the pure black water. She responds politely in the affirmative. He was very happy to have come to Hefei. His order cost 99 iron coins. He pays it with just 1 silver coin, leaving the girl grateful. The sandwich was beautiful and very well made, apparently. He quickly devours it, amazed by that otherworldly flavor. Then he tries the liquid from the bottle, becoming even more impressed by that delicious taste. The flavor was incredible, and the price very cheap. He returns to his carriage, enjoying the delicious drink. A massive and imposing structure is seen along the path. It was the magnificent and grand Hefei Inn. The lights of that place could dazzle anyone who looked directly at them. Many people were there with happy expressions. Yum Jukson is left in awe of it all. He observes the celestial carriages, which were very rare. The young master Siu Moon is warmly welcomed upon arrival. The women there were quite attractive, according to Lee Junfan, better known as Bruce Lee. Yum Jukson thinks that the name of that guy sounds like that of a great fighter. Han Junbo welcomes him and quickly asks if he wanted a fated meeting, leaving him quite confused about what that meant. The encounter was with a beautiful woman, and he wanted to take him there. He then asks one of the employees to take good care of that celestial carriage, but one guy gets very angry for not being allowed to do so. Yum Jukson had already heard about denied entries, such as the young master from the Pang family of Hebei. Hyung Nim gets very angry for not being allowed to enter the place, cursing the guy who was in charge, leaving him in a tough spot, quite furious. He soon threatens to kill him if he doesn't go home. Then a footstep is heard. Manager Jang arrives but is not informed of the ongoing issues because he doesn't need to worry about them. Yum Jukson thinks that guy looks quite strong. Jang threatens to break Hyung Nim's face if he doesn't head home. He runs off in a full sprint. The manager quickly announces that it's past 7 and no client would enter for free. Yum Jukson is impressed, assuming that before 7 o'clock, he would have entered at no cost, asking his guide, who replies that this only applied to women, not men, because any ladies who arrived before Jinchi receive snacks and 3 bottles of rice wine completely free. Jang pays close attention to the conversation between the two, and then quickly calls Jumbo over, asking if that guy wasn't a bit suspicious, but is told that he arrived in a celestial carriage, making him ponder silently for a moment, and quickly says to take the guy inside. Inside the place, there were many colorful lights, a lot of music and people dancing vigorously. Dozens of people were there at that moment. Jumbo asks if Jum Jukson wants to be taken to the love room, but since it was his first time there, he decides to get a table to observe better. The prices of the tables also varied a lot. Many women were seen dancing there, and the closer the table was to the stage, the more expensive it was. Jum Jukson likes the idea of being taken closer to the girls. To drink, he wanted some rice wine. But Jumbo doesn't quite agree, as a table like that required at least 2 bottles of winter's frozen liquor, leaving Jum Jukson very impressed because that was very expensive. The music and the lights seemed to grow larger and larger. A guy announces that the young master Siu Moon had ordered snowflake wine, increasing the venue's volume. The girls soon bring the drink to him. It came in a gray bottle with designs. A man wonders who the heck that guy was. All the girls surrounded him, throwing themselves at him. His laugh was one of great happiness with all of it. The girls gently ran their hands over his body, leaving Jun Jukson furious with that. He quickly orders 2 bottles that would cost 120 gold coins. He accepts nonetheless and orders the waiter to bring them quickly. Jang watches all of this attentively. The girl tells him that she is busy at the moment. She had to go immediately to Jun Jukson's table. He would pay her 1/10 of the bottle price. She quickly gets excited about the high payment. Jun Jukson didn't even take a month to spend all this fortune. Meanwhile, in the Grand Mercantile group of the Cho clan, the leader was entering the place. Kyovui asked them to stop all those formalities. Everyone then sits at the table with the leader, who soon asks why the expansion of the grand treasure of frozen stone hadn't been done, being told it would likely fail. He is left very confused because the investment was enormous, quickly asking for explanations. Then he is informed that the larger the scale of the frozen treasure, the more its effect would diminish, even with the 10,000-year crystal. He doesn't know what to do because the production limit was only 750 kilograms per day. Qiu Huai thinks about the first law of thermodynamics, feeling like a fool for forgetting it as demand was increasing drastically. He quickly asked about the pure black water, which was right there in front of him with the old man. He then tastes the dark beverage, rejecting the flavor because apparently it was worse than before even after testing various hot springs that month. The employee is saddened and is quickly ordered to write 20 pages of reflection. This makes him cry, falling into total despair. Meanwhile, at the inn complex, Jang brings news about the doubled sales increase. Impressed, he had initially planned to hire the guy as a responsible doorman. But, in truth, he turned out to be a sales genius, learning 10 times faster and being the best at catching fools. Thoughtful, Qiu Huai decides that it's not easy to make Coca-Cola from complete scratch. Jang had something to say in the meantime, and it was about the 10,000-year ice crystal from the frozen palace of the North Sea. Qiu Huai becomes quite curious about the subject. Jang then asks if they could invite a master who had learned the frozen techniques, because he didn't understand why Qiu Huai was so fixated on the treasure. Simply giving permission for them to train the arts there would open many doors for the ice business. Qiu Huai is impressed by his employee's brilliant proposal, ending chapter 27. He feels ashamed of himself for the things he was doing with the 1,000-year-old freezers from the Northern Ocean. He couldn't believe he had mocked Jang, calling him an idiot when he was a real genius. Quickly, he asks if anyone there wanted to go to the North Sea. Everyone remains silent and very pensive, because the North Sea was a very distant place, taking half a year to return, especially for the older ones. Ko Hui then offers 1,000 gold coins to anyone who could find a technique to create ice. Jang says that under those circumstances he would go, But the leader wouldn't allow him to go because he needed him to ensure that the Haben Hall remained stable. He then thinks about whom to send on the mission. Soon, he asks the old man about the fools, leaving him quite confused. He was referring to the guys with red beards, discovering that they had been confined in the house's prison for 6 months. He orders his employee to fetch the men quickly. After a few minutes at the Red Mansion, the old man finally arrives with the men, leaving them outside as Cho Hui wanted only their leader to enter. A man slowly enters, carrying an expression of complete physical and mental exhaustion. Jang looks at that man closely, astonished, because that guy was Mr. Kang, his former leader. He collapses to the ground, crying profusely. Jang tries to approach him to help, asking what had happened. Cho Hui reprimands all those tears and calls him over. The boy thinks his brother only acted this way when someone threatened him. That old cripple gets close to the table and is immediately ordered to go to the North Sea. Quickly, with his head down, he tries to justify himself. It seemed he still wanted to live off Mandu, because that's all they were fed every day. Cho Hui promises him that they would be freed once the mission was completed. This makes Mr. Kang accept without hesitation. He threatens him in case he hides or flees. Mr. Kang curses him in every way, saying that if it were possible, he would have done it without thinking twice, and quickly states that it won't happen. Meanwhile, in another place a little far from there, on those well-known and enormous stairways, Namgong Baek begins to brood over something. He thinks that 3 years ago, he should have destroyed the 10,000-year ice crystal because nothing Cho Hui did was normal. All of his inventions had even caused government officials to lose their jobs. Because of such actions, even the delivery workers and escort agencies were suffering, in addition to having created a new concept of carriage called a car, along with establishing a brewery. Cho Hui had also built a cake shop that sold black water and 6-layer food, dominating the food industry. And every time he started a business, those signs would sway. This was why so many people flooded the Namgong family residence like a great wave, almost impossible to stop. But there was one thing that made him angrier. Suddenly, a girl arrives with food from the Cho clan's restaurant, which he had already been craving. He grabs the bottle with the drink and reveals that he is the most addicted to those exotic foods. A boy arrives announcing that some people were there to talk, leaving him quite puzzled. The most likely reason was about the inns. He had even forgotten all about it, but there was one more thing to be revealed. The young master of the Hua family's sword sect was also there at that moment. That group had been bothering the old man frequently, making him very nervous. And there was still more to be said. Jiggle was also there, but he did need permission to enter as it was a personal visit. The boy reveals that he hadn't come as a friend, leaving Nambong back very curious about this. The boy in blue then says that he was there as a junior inspector appointed by the Murim Alliance. The old man quickly decides to receive his visitor, being supported by his employee in this decision. There was a significant doubt about all of this. The employee leads the inspector to his boss, who welcomes him warmly. Jiggle asks if Mr. Baek was doing well. He's answered affirmatively and warmly complimented being invited to sit at the table. He thanks him and states that he wants to get straight to the point of the conversation. But before anything else, Mr. Baek wants to ask just one question. The question was why so much care was being taken when there were still 2 months left until the sequential inspection. Jiggle remains silent for a few seconds upon hearing this. He then reveals that the chief inspector had visited Amwee, suspecting something, leaving the old man quite anxious. He thought that the Cho group's big business was an enterprise benefiting under the Namgong clan. Baek becomes very angry upon hearing this because the Cho battalion worked independently. He still didn't understand what the alliance was planning. Jiggle states that Anhui's population had doubled in recent years, potentially even surpassing Nanjing, and the government had a plan regarding this. Mr. Baek then understands everything, justifying that they were only a humble faction. He is then told that the movement of the Huchinryan was highly suspicious, leaving him with a very startled and attentive expression. To them, Anhui was now a battlefield where they could risk their lives, creating an opportunity to become the best among Sampection. However, the Cho clan's business was still in a gray area on the scale between justice and evil, with the alliance wanting its fortune. Mr. Baek considers the inspector's proposal very carefully. Whoever controlled the largest business in Anhui wasn't under the alliance. In the worst-case scenario, the Namgong clan would have to manage Huchinryan alone. Jekyll knew it was difficult, but the old man needed to make a quick decision. He then asks how much time they have. The inspector reveals that the group of spies had been annihilated and the alliance was currently blind, with time running out, ending the chapter. Mr. Baek then slams his fist on the table in anger, thinking that this situation was almost a declaration of war since they both knew about the espionage activities. He then says that he will call Cho Hui to decide the matter immediately, being told that he had already been summoned by the alliance and would arrive soon. Feeling very pensive and with a worried expression, someone was there in front of the temple. It was the leader of the Just Sky along with Cho Hui. The two meet with another person, who quickly calls them to follow him inside. The leader wishes all the best for Cho Hui, leaving him a bit confused, but grateful nonetheless. That temple was grand and beautiful. He then enters, finding himself face to face with several important men. He then nervously thinks about how rare it was to have them all gathered there. There were the head of the Namgong family, Namgong Su, and the young master Namgong Jang Ho, along with Namgong Seong Chan and the leader of the Namgong clan, Mr. Baek, together with Namgong Wu and Jiggle Woon. He pulls out a large document to read, announcing that the alliance wanted to declare something to Cho Hui, and concludes everything he wanted to say for the moment. Cho Hui realizes that they wanted the Cho family's business to be placed under the Namgong clan's control, monitored and overseen by the alliance. This organization, which called itself Righteous, was no different from a gang of bandits, and there was something the alliance elders were misunderstanding. Jiggle is confused, and Cho Hui explains that they had judged him based on the current situation in Kangho, and that he could transform Namchang into a new Hefei, leaving Jagal all confused and perplexed. Cho-Hui was a businessman and didn't mind taking risks if it was for his own benefit, but there was a catch. Many people wanted to take a piece of the hard-earned profits, making him think of one thing. Who among them would offer him the greatest benefit? Mr. Bake then asks if the boy was going crazy because he wanted to become Huchunrian's lapdog for money. But it was necessary when there were thieves wanting to steal everything since there were no limits to human ambition, and he quickly posed a question, leaving Mr. Nambong Bake extremely angry and embarrassed. It was revealed that 3 years ago, Hefei's population was around 86,000 people, and now it had grown to 170,000, making the boy ask the same question. He becomes quite nervous after the same question as before. Cho-Hui reveals that if the elders wanted him too, he would back down because he was definitely also one of the Nambong, but he had no intention of belonging to either the just or the evil alongside the alliance. This leaves the bearded man deep in thought after these words, because few people in the history of Kangno had managed to do this, and they all had something in common. Cho-Hui says the man is absolutely right because he had already heard this from a close acquaintance. The sword god soon appears, revealing some information about becoming stronger to the boy. Upon hearing this, his eyes turn white with ambition, and he shouts that he will follow this path to become the strongest of all. His voice could be heard from outside the temple. Everyone there is surprised and frightened. Now he could see all the laws of physics that existed in that world, and it had become ingrained in his brain. At first, he couldn't accept the duration of the joyful moment of realization because it felt like only a few minutes had passed. But when he woke up, his clothes were worn out, and the sword god quickly revealed that 3 years had passed. He was very happy for the boy, calling his modified body the desired body of the sword lord, despite his eye issues. Many white lights could be seen by him in that hall. This was the state in which his eyes were embedded, those of a warrior spirit. Except for a martial art like the plum blossom technique, this phenomenon was definitely for those who had reached the unfathomable level, making the old man wonder how that young boy could have reached this state. The gray-haired man says that the boy is no ordinary apprentice. Even if he were a disciple of Mu Jimeong, it would be madness to claim, so he asks if the inspector feels the same, leaving him quite confused. He says the boy was at the unfathomable level, making Jagal perplexed, because even among the best man's sects, there were only 4 places with someone at this level. The old man advises him to find someone to try and change the boy's mindset. He says he will return to the alliance immediately, leaving slowly toward the door. Mr. Bake asks Cho-Hui what Nambong means to him. The boy with the extremely white eyes thinks for a while, and says it is like his uncle, who he feels grateful for when he covers for him when he messes up, thinking he's an idiot. The bearded old man asks what they thought about giving the boy a respectful position within the family hierarchy. Very tense. The Namgong clan leader takes a deep breath and says there is one condition to be fulfilled in these circumstances for Mr. Bake. The condition was a genuine marriage with a woman from the family. Everyone there falls silent, staring at each other without saying anything. Jang Ho then says it would be impossible for his father, because Sosa was hopelessly in love with Jang Il-ryong and even cooked for him every day. The old man thinks a bit more, remaining silent. He then says that Somi was still an option, but this makes everyone there very angry. Jang Ho reveals that she had just turned 19. Cho-Hui, very nervous, disagrees with all those decisions because he didn't want to be tied down, leaving the old man very confused and pensive. He says he would never do that in his life. The old man says that if he didn't want the position, he would have to return the celestial sword plaque. This makes him very angry, as it would be blackmail, wanting him tied to them. The old man questions why he had said before that Namgong was like his family. He could continue doing his business without the group's ambition and still have their support in difficult times. Cho-Hui then thinks there's no way out. He accepts the hierarchical position, but does not allow the marriage. This leaves the bearded old man deep in thought, remaining silent. He then orders the elders and other members to be gathered, because the family rules would be changed immediately. Cho-Hui asks to leave the place, slipping away toward the door. But suddenly, someone approaches him and reprimands him for leaving at that moment, ending the chapter. Cho-Hui had not seen the visitors the old man had mentioned, as he was in a hurry. He then discovers that all those powerful people from Anhui were at the location because of his hotel, leaving him quite confused. What was wrong was that the children of rich families were squandering their fortunes there instead of focusing on their studies. Many engagements had been broken due to the bachelor parties. Upon learning this, Cho-Hui's eyes widen in shock, justifying that they had not forced anyone to spend money on expensive drinks and that it was their own choice to do so. This response makes the old man very angry and nervous. He asks Cho-Hui to close the place for a while so they could get rid of those visitors. Cho-Hui agrees and decides to stop all operations for half a month. This leaves the men there very stunned because he didn't need to shut down all his businesses, just the hotel. All the establishments were well loved by everyone who protested against this. The businesses wouldn't be closed individually as it would demoralize the employees. The old man tries to offer a solution for these things, leaving Cho-Hui quite angry because the Nambong family would not pay for salary increases or compensate for the losses. Everyone there remains desperate over the closure of the establishments. Then the man in blue asks the name of that limited cloud carriage and if he could get it soon. This vehicle was the Grand Celestial Cloud Car. Cho-Hui says it would arrive in 2 days, leaving the old man quite astonished. He asks the other man where the visitors are, and he is told that they are at the Blue Dragon building. He then says he will return after practicing the release and control of his energy, leaving the other old man deep in thought about what the Namgong family had become. Someone nearby was sitting on the stairs next to a carriage. It was Jagal, reflecting on his failed plans in Hefei. Chilhui was very strong, even though he was almost his age. Besides that, he was just a businessman, full of knowledge and excellent calligraphy, hardly seeming like a real human. Jagal becomes very angry at the existence of this impressive person. Suddenly, he arrives looking very suspicious. He was furious because he had been stabbed in the back right after paying Jagal 20 gold coins. Someone nearby is heard calling for help, but Chilhui wanted to hear the guy's excuses first. He says he cannot make any decision on his own while belonging to the Alliance and only does what it commands. Chilhui bets that his plan was to continue disrupting his businesses, but he is quickly reprimanded as Jagal is still an inspector. He imagines that there's nothing a mere employee can do except obey his superiors. If he did everything Chilhui asked, the problems would be forgotten, and he asks if he had thought about the things previously discussed. Jagal responds that he could not do it. The proposal was 200 gold coins per month to be the vice president of Cho's businesses, much more than he earned at the Alliance. When Jagal was about to reveal the problem, he is interrupted by someone who arrives with heavy and firm steps. It is Jang Ho calling Master Chilhui, saying he would like to learn from him, leaving him quite confused because he thought things were already settled. But now he was an elder of the Nambong family and was expected to teach the younger ones. Jang Ho could not believe that someone his age had reached such a level, and it was very impressive. Chilhui remains silent and thoughtful for a few seconds. The boy in blue says that he has much to learn and asks not to be underestimated. A Sword of God's orb appears, telling Chilhui not to ignore the sincerity of a swordsman. He agrees with everything, leaving the boy quite excited and enthusiastic. They go to a battlefield. The boy holds his sword firmly in his hands, pleading for his master to teach him, who calls him closer. He tries the Emperor's sword with a direct double slash, along with the Supreme Monarch's earthquake, but Chilhui dodges these strikes very easily, leaving the boy very surprised and frightened by this teleportation, thinking it was an illusion. Chilhui quickly charges at the young man, who fights bravely once again. The battle between the two is intense and thrilling. The boy defends himself bravely with his sword, but a strike hits him, causing him to bleed from the mouth. He is very impressed because his opponent had dispersed the Emperor's earthquake so easily without any difficulty. He probably dispersed the technique just by observing the flow of his Kai. If not, there were no plausible explanations for it, raising doubts about whether such things could be done by humans. Chilhui charges at him again with full force. The battle becomes intense and contested once more. He attempted the same attack again. Jang Ho positions himself with his palm raised, then trying the final strike with the Emperor's talon and sword. His master quickly arrives, telling him to stop because he could not use those abilities in his current state. Chilhui observes him closely without doing anything. His eyes begin to shine brightly. Jang Ho watches him nervously and fearfully. Chilhui begins to move his sword rapidly, swinging it toward his opponent. Suddenly, a blue light with an explosive appearance is seen right there. Jang Ho tries to move toward the boy bravely, but is soon halted, groaning in pain and agony. Everyone there calls out for Jang Ho, the junior swordsman. After the smoke clears, a shadow is seen. It was him, with blood dripping from his mouth. He asks what technique was used and its name. Chilhui had used the Celestial Sword's flow trick, calling the weapon Galactic Meteors. Many comments are heard around the fighting ring. The elders discuss the genius of both boys. What they would call Chilhui, having defeated the genius Jang Ho, was a mystery. The two elders are quite confused during this conversation. No one, even with their extraordinary eyes, could explain or describe that impressive man. With just one move, he had managed to defeat the family leader, which meant his talent was not limited to normal martial arts. There was something in his swordsmanship that did not belong to Kang Ho, making a precise description impossible because such a thing had not existed until then. The old man says that he is the man from the Green Sword Manual, and asks if the other could withstand and defend against the boy, receiving an uncertain response. The young man's swordsmanship was simply flawless and without defects. Namgon Bake becomes very angry because no one had ever been praised that way by the master. That technique considered every move his opponent could make, allowing him to control the direction of the battle, forcing the enemy to defend. If he truly performed like that in earnest, he would be the true sword god. The old man says that the boy is far from being a genius. He's more like an immortal like the three immortals. The mustache man thinks the boy is certainly a strong candidate to become the next immortal, unable to escape his fate. Celestial Meteor Sword, a weapon that could reach the heavens, was an arrogant name, yet still an excellent technique. Jang Ho stares at Chilhui for a few seconds without saying anything, and Chilhui stares back in silence. Chilhui orders him to stand up quickly. Jagal arrives, telling the boy that he wouldn't return to the Alliance and wanted something. But someone suddenly arrives, stopping everything that was happening. It was the great and impressive young master Hyun, asking who this powerful boy was. Chilhui looks around attentively without hesitation, while that guy stood very angrily in front of him. He had been inspired by Chilhui for being so successful in business, calling him wise and intelligent. Chilhui remains silent as he listens to all of this, but he didn't know he was brilliant in martial arts, even as his brother. Chilhui says that he had become a confident fighter, even discovering how to see energy. It had been 10 years, and the sunset that day was truly beautiful. He had started to sob under the tree behind their house, and Chilhui thought he was crying from pain in his fists. The boy listens to all this from his brother very attentively. But the older Chilhui grew, the less he understood the real reason for the tears, speculating various things about his father and mother, leaving the boy even more thoughtful and attentive. He then says that he wanted revenge, but that wasn't the reason for his tears that time, leaving Chilhui quite confused. After living for 2 months in the forest, hiding from the Yem bandits, he had become extremely weak after falling ill. The boy becomes very angry upon hearing this from Cho Hui, with his eyes full of tears. That brother has actually had a hole in his stomach. A scene of a tragic attack flashes through his mind, making him cry like a defenseless child. He hadn't been able to protect his younger brother and sister, and if it happened again, he would never forgive himself, so he trained every single day. Cho Hui then thinks that everything had happened because of him, and shows that he is now perfectly fine, with no scar on his stomach. He asked if Cho Hui was really his brother, but only he knew about his baby-like cries. Either way, he questions how such martial art could be possible. Cho Hui lets out a small laugh, leaving him very confused as he hadn't understood yet. He then says that he is a true genius. Since his brother was so proud, he was already leaving. Because Cho Hui was taking things too far, making many enemies, but he says he would feel relieved with Hyung protecting the house, being called a shameless little brat. The older brother remained the same without any change. Cho Hui returns to what he was doing earlier. He apologizes to Jaegal and orders him to continue, being told that the conversation should also be had with the Nambone family leader. They would already be at the clan's temple. The group leader asks when it happened. Jaegal says that he would not return to the alliance and would join the warrior Cho Hui, asking for permission to do so. This was indeed what he wanted, but the leader would be severely punished if everything went wrong. He then asked about his brave objective of diving into Huchinmyeon. Even though the boy was very talented in martial arts, he was still new to Kangho, and there were many things he could do and places he could go. Jaegal was planning to save them because he believed someone was hiding something from the Huchinmyeon assassins. He also wanted to rebuild the spy association and gain access to the information currently being gathered. The old man asks if this was really possible because the targeted place was Namcheng. Jaegal says he was an invincible master, but the old man replies that everything would be in vain if he didn't want to go. Cho Hui says they were bad people trying to steal his fortune, so he had no reason not to cooperate. But rebuilding the spy association was a terrible idea. Jaegal says that Cho Hui would probably benefit from the information they were gathering at the moment. There was no guarantee that a spy wasn't already in his business, and he could help the boy without hesitation. Jaegal manages to convince Cho Hui, and only needs the old man's permission. But he had one condition. However, he could not take his son on the mission, because the boy was too stubborn. But the Jaegal family wasn't exactly an example in that regard either. In the master's eyes, both had come from similar groups with no experience in Kangho. The old man calls Jang Ho, who was standing by. He asked if he hadn't found a great teacher who could teach him about the evil sect. The boy is very surprised as he knew about Jang Il-ryang, who also observes everything attentively from afar. There were many warriors from his family there, yet he thought he could keep it a secret. The reason why the king of the forest hadn't attacked the residents in the last 3 years was unknown to the boy, who shouldn't have hidden anything. He responds affirmatively to his father. He then says that their lives would be at risk, and they should learn about the evil faction that Jang Il-ryang was a part of receiving an affirmative response. The sun was already setting at that place. Jang Il-ryang is seen inside that building. He says he is busy at the moment for conversations. He also asks if something had happened. Jang Ho says they were there to learn the ways of evil, leaving him very confused and puzzled about it. Jaegal reveals the reason behind all this. The boy ponders it deeply. Then he joins his hands in greeting to the visitors, and respectfully asks them to leave his room. Everyone there understands the boy's message, quickly realizing that they didn't even have the basic notions, bowing to someone who acted politely. Jang Ho is very confused because they should show respect to everyone, but they would be caught immediately with such an attitude, making it evident that they were from a righteous faction. Jaegal thinks he is on the same level as Nambone Jang. Again, the boy greets him with his hands. Automatically, everyone there also shows respect. Feeling very embarrassed afterward, Jang Il-ryang suggests that they give up because good manners were already ingrained and could not be fixed with just a few practices. Cho Hui reveals that some people were planning to take the business by force and should be stopped. Jang Il-ryang asks who it was, discovering it was Huchinmyeon. He becomes very angry upon hearing this. He quickly decides to help them in just 4 days, especially Jang Ho-hyung Nim, who should no longer say the name of the technique out loud during battles. He was revealing his moves to the enemy like a fool. He feels very sad because it was really cool. There was a wicked bastard who maliciously threw a weapon while pretending to greet, and he was the best example. Jang Ho-hyung Nim wonders how a martial artist could be so shameless. The affection-sucking puppy had a pitiful face, draining the energy of those who hugged him out of pity. And you should be cautious of a man who pretended to be disabled, as hundreds of masters had their heads crushed by his ambush. Cho Hui says there was no normal person because they were all crazy, receiving the response that regardless, the evil sect had a main trait, and that was stabbing in the back. The masters of the evil sect had cold hearts due to surviving in this harsh world, and in that place, many strikes would be taken. Now he would deal with Jaegal Hyun Nim. He was not authorized to use the fan that way, nor to use his eyes to pass off the energy of a polite man. He is very stunned by this information. However, he couldn't announce that he came from a prosperous family, being noble and well-educated. All those people had difficult lives and held different thoughts about wealthy folks due to the hardships they endured. Jang Il-ryang takes a deep breath at that moment. Then he mocks everyone there, telling them to go back home. This makes everyone there very angry. Someone who drew their sword after being insulted was considered righteous 80% of the time. A true member of the evil sect would never be bothered by such a small insult and would simply observe coldly. Cho Hui thinks he was born to be one of them. Jang Il-ryang wields a sharp knife that gleams brightly. What he had just said could be considered a compliment in that world, but probably those boys wouldn't be able to hear anyone speak about their parents. At the start of their training, they were supposed to face each other and say everything negative they could think about one another, and if they reacted, they would instantly lose. Jang Ho tries to insult Cho Hui, who retaliates by talking about his mother. The two do this again. Jang Ho becomes very angry upon hearing the boy speak about his mother. Cho Hui doesn't need training for this. It's child's play for someone who has read every kind of insult on the internet. Namu and Hyung Nim should just keep his mouth shut and pretend to be any ordinary traveler. Jiggle and Cho Hui agree with the idea proposed by Jang Il Ryan. Jang Ho remains silent and thoughtful during this. He ponders why he is doing this and asks when they will leave. He is told that first they need to announce a leave and complete some tasks. He only asks that a letter be sent when it's time. Cho Hui had heard that there were at least 8,000 martial artists in Huchinrian. Jiggle confirms this, leaving him with doubts regarding the tracking. They would use light detection, noise detection, and X-ray techniques. Cho Hui could fight the strongest people there, and this could also be used to the group's advantage. Jiggle continues praising him profusely. Cho Hui asks him to stop immediately. He wasn't sure about being immune to cold and poisons. All the plans and tactics were beyond his talent, making Jiggle Shin get very fearful. He would be capable of escaping alone in extreme cases, and with that, they would already have enough weapons if something catastrophic happened. To sum it up precisely, Jiggle wanted him to cheat like a ticking time bomb. He was overestimating him, thinking he was an invincible master. It wasn't like Cho Hui was immortal because he was still just a man, not a god. But Jiggle keeps insisting that he is indeed a divine being and the only person Jiggle Shin Gai feared. The sword god appears, saying that the boy had a lot of admiration for his martial arts. Cho Hui takes a breath and remains silent for a brief moment. He then says that the boy is misunderstanding something because he is not invincible, leaving him very confused and prompting him to ask further questions. To be honest, his transcendence was a bit strange compared to the techniques of other transcendental masters who had practiced their methods for years. They use external energy to keep their balance steady, maintaining calm minds along with a philosophy of fair battle. However, in Cho Hui's case, he hadn't spent much time or worked hard, and he currently had only 3 things mastered. And for that reason, everything Jiggle Woon said about being omniscient and invincible based on his techniques only showed that he was essentially the only semi-transcendent. It seemed there was just one strategy based on having complete faith in Cho Hui, which could definitely fail. But he thinks it's a misunderstanding from the Nambong elders, so he can make them take responsibility. He then orders Jiggle to keep the honored guest there for about 7 or 15 days, maybe even a month. This makes Jiggle very angry because it made no sense. He is told in return to go to Namchang then. He could give him 4 days, nothing more, and even curses the mercantile corporation. Cho Hui says he will try his best. Far from there, in that enormous temple, the family head is seen among various plants. The two meet, greeting each other immediately with much charisma. He then asks if the meticulous outlaw training had been completed, and Cho Hui affirms it. The leader bets that he wouldn't see his careful friend for a long time. He stares at him silently and still for a few seconds. Then he asks if the master believed his martial art was truly at a transcendental level. The leader is quite taken aback by the question, as the technique was undoubtedly morally correct. He might have hesitations after entering a state of complete egolessness from the grave, but Cho Hui had achieved transcendence through a different method. Moreover, he had never studied scriptures or learned movement techniques. The chief is curious to know the explanations for what he had witnessed during the battle. That time, the only thing Cho Hui had done was move quickly, dodging attacks. He says he will explain that later and asked about his position in the Namgong family, inquiring if he could learn something. He discovers that as an elder, he could learn all the martial arts of the family, except for the clan head's secret technique. So he respectfully requests to be taught the Nambong group's martial art. He wanted to learn everything that was allowed, including the basics. The old man with the long beard thinks that the boy wanted to wander through Kangho with his martial arts and should be happy about it, but there was a catch. He agrees to teach him personally, making Cho Hui very grateful. Suddenly, his feet start moving very rapidly. These were the steps of the celestial wind, the first skill, followed by the 6-wheel wind and the dodge wind as the second. The third was the great gigantic gale. Next, the fourth would be the lightning wind. Cho Hui observes everything attentively, his eyes shining brightly. To finalize, the celestial wind steps of the Nambong family culminate in the king wind. Suddenly, Cho Hui begins moving his head quickly and moves with great caution and mastery. He accelerates his movements with each passing second. Suddenly, a massive cyclone emerges from his movements. The chief is impressed seeing the dodge wind, as it was a technique meant to escape a dangerous situation, creating chaos for opponents. But that skill could also be used as an attack. Cho Hui finally plants his feet firmly on the ground and observes all the damage he had caused, perplexed. He then apologizes for the destruction, but is quickly reprimanded by the master, who asks if that was truly the dodge wind. He was correct, immediately questioning how it became so different from what he had taught. Cho Hui then explains that he had eradicated all unnecessary movements and added different methods to enhance perfection, but he couldn't explain it properly. His feet begin moving with mastery once again, at only a tenth of the original speed. The master thinks all of this is impossible, as it seemed like he was witnessing an entirely different skill. He questioned whether some of the world's best techniques could be as perfect as that, as he had studied these skills his entire life. Cho Hui thinks that after applying physics to the technique, the movement had become like that of a figure skater, but it used a lot of energy and should be avoided unless necessary. The family head says he shouldn't like the idea of changing the original skill, but admits he doesn't feel that way. He then asks if Cho Hui could show everything slowly again, and Cho Hui agrees. He immediately begins his masterful movements. It seemed as if he was in multiple places at once, but suddenly, the chief asks him to stop, wondering how such movements could connect. Cho Hui explains that he couldn't clarify it unless he first explained physics to the old man. He says it was just a habit and that he wanted to learn the next technique quickly. Now, 4 days after all these events, a loud noise is heard in the area. The elders wonder what it could be in front of them. It was a new Manboon being forged based on a tradition of 400 years. They said that the sky was infinite without end or limitations, but it felt as if the limit could be seen, making it seem like the sword was the greatest in the world. This was one of the martial arts of the Namboon family, and an ordinary man could never replicate it. The elder becomes angry when called useless by another, who retorts, ordering him not to judge by worldly standards, as he could feel something coming from that man, something very powerful. The other elder is quite confused by this. He is then informed that it was something impossible to see with the naked eye, shattering all beliefs like those in Jungwon. He is left astonished by all of this, but that elder was absolutely certain that the boy was definitely the next immortal. A golden sword is drawn from its sheath. Cho Hwai expresses gratitude to the master for showing him everything about the family, except for the secret techniques. The old man clenches his fists tightly and thinks that he also wanted to show him the form of the emperor's sword so he could perfect it properly. A hand is then placed on his back. The elder tells him that it cannot happen under any circumstances. Cho Hui asks to leave as he is very tired. Permission is granted as he had done enough up until then. The day remains beautiful with many clouds in the sky. That enormous and beautiful temple is in sight. Cho Hui is inside, observing a large map. A man brings Jaegal to him. The two are expected to sit down at that moment. Cho Hui asks them to discuss the plans before they depart so he can review the strategy. Jaegal had already mentioned that they would track down the spies. Cho Hui gives a slight, mocking laugh. He then suggests that if the spies were found, he wondered what they would do next, ending the chapter. Jaegal becomes nervous at this question, as many benefits could clearly be gained from it. Cho Hui speculates that the information would be sent to the Alliance, leaving uncertainty about what would happen next. Jaegal reveals that the group would send at least 3 or 4 large battalions of soldiers to Anhui province. Cho Hui finds the number small but learns that the Alliance had other borders to protect. He then thinks about the people the Namboon family would send. He quickly assumes the Alliance would win but questions what would happen after that. Jaegal says that judging by the general's personality, they would put a lot of pressure on the opponent, trying to avoid battles as much as possible. The best outcome would be dealing with the northern part of Gangseo and having them as allies of the Alliance. Cho Hui thinks that eventually, after so much effort, they would absorb part of Huchinrian. But Jaegal considers that a foolish question. Cho Hui takes a deep breath without saying anything, and states that his business declines the Alliance's help, sending Jaegal back to the Alliance. The boy is shocked by this, and Cho Hui repeats what he just said. Jaegal, desperate, explains that all the Alliance's spies had been killed, and there was a 90% chance Huchinrian would attack Hefei. Cho Hui reassures him, saying that it will not happen, and again sends him back. The boy becomes very angry, wanting to know what Cho Hui was planning so confidently. Huchinrian had dozens of excellent warriors, with almost 20 great masters who were nearly unbeatable. Cho Hui says he has no intention of sharing his plan with someone from another team, and that if Jaegal listened, he wouldn't let him return to the Alliance. Jaegal becomes desperate, fearing his friend would imprison him. But Cho Hui simply wanted him to join his plan, also leaving the Alliance immediately, to which Jaegal responds negatively. And since he refused, he could return to where he came from. Jaegal becomes very pensive and desperate. His expression shows all his pain. Suddenly, he falls to his knees on the ground, holding his head in his hands. Cho Hui pulls out a piece of paper from his coat, because he didn't believe in promises made only through dialogue. He then presses the boy to sign the contract quickly. Jaegal agrees and asks to be told the plan immediately. Cho Hui asks what would happen if the Cho family abandoned Hefei. Jaegal, who had never considered himself a businessman selling things, is left surprised, wondering what those things Cho Hui had been selling really were. But Cho Hui explains that he was only trading in culture. Jaegal wonders what kind of business Cho Hui is talking about with such arrogance, as he feels unqualified to make such a statement. The culture that had been established in the people was irreplaceable. Those who experienced it would never forget, and it was the only place where that was possible. Cho Hui was planning to sell this culture to Gangseo without falling under their command. The power of Huchinrian was terrifying, but if they posed any threat, the businesses would leave. The people of Gangseo could live well in their lands, but the martial artists would not withstand it. As long as they controlled the culture, no one would lay a finger on the Cho family's businesses. Not even the Murim alliance could. Cho Hui planned to destroy that entire place, forcing Huchinrian to kneel like little dogs. Jaegal imagines that Cho Hui must have a good reserve for this. He is surprised when he hears about 100,000 silver coins, but seems to underestimate the family's business, because in reality, Cho Hui would pay everything in gold. After learning this, the boy's eyes widen in astonishment, wondering how much Cho Hui earned per month. Everyone believed that the hotels and restaurants were his main businesses, but it was the Anhui Forge that held that position, because it provided weapons for the army, earning a profit of 55,000 gold coins, plus 20,000 for repairs, in just 1 year. Not to mention the carriages, hundreds of harvesting tools, and other equipment. The reason his businesses had taken control of all Hefei was that all these profits were reinvested into other enterprises. Cho Hui explains that this value could triple now that it was decided, and asks manager Jaegal to stand up so they could continue. Jaegal thought he would become the operations chief, and that the salary was half of what was offered before. Cho Hui responds that a person's value depends on the situation and the timing. Back then, he needed effort, but today it was different. Jaegal asks if at least he could teach him arithmetic, leaving Cho Hui a bit puzzled. An employee informs them that the young master had arrived. Cho Huai agrees to teach him on the way to Namchang, making Jae-il very happy. Jang Ho apologizes for the delay, and Jang Il-ryong is surprised to see them. He greets them politely. Jae-il suddenly enters a state of panic but maintains his composure. Cho Hui asks why they were meeting so early. Jang Il-ryong expresses concern for his comrades, asking to join them. The leader seems a bit puzzled by all of this. His employee then suggests leaving Jumbo in charge of the hotel. But it did make sense, as Jumbo hadn't shown any progress, immediately rejecting his boss's opinion, which the leader surprisingly agrees with despite it being a rather crazy idea. It would all be like the Avengers. Jae-il asks what that means, but he rushes off, wanting to spend a lot of money. The day is beautiful, with many clouds in the sky. A person is seen at the top of a beautiful building. The man criticizes the young woman and even tries to insult her. She listens carefully and turns around, holding something in her hand. It was a large braided rope. The man provokes her further, insulting her. She swiftly descends from the detailed structure, with her hair flying in the air. She asks him to repeat himself, listening to more insults. She then grips the whip tightly and strikes the annoying man with all her strength. She asks him why he has so much anger and hatred towards her. He provokes her again with insults. The woman asks what he came to do there, threatening him. The man says a golden goblin had appeared in Poyang Lake, leaving her completely shocked and perplexed, ending this chapter. She feels curious, but he only repeats what he had heard from his superiors, mentioning that someone was buying large amounts of land around Poyang Lake. She is certain that this person would flee, terrified after being robbed, as it wasn't unusual to see such things. The man informs her that the person had purchased 200 square kilometers, astonishing her. She also suspects it might be someone from the imperial family. Even though Dan Wumyong had been expelled, it was a mystery who would dare return there. What could be done with such a vast land remained unknown. The man reveals that the superiors wanted a meeting with a new resident of the area, as they also wanted to buy that property. The woman is surprised because someone wanted to acquire Ho Chun Rian's land. Additionally, all these things seem like a huge madness. They start arguing again like two fools. And soon, the man tells her to get ready because the enemies would arrive soon. They would be heading to the central part of Ho Chun Rian. She says she wants a scythe to kill all those people. She is very ruthless toward others. The man becomes very angry with her, and she just asks where the visitors would be waiting. He reveals it's at the Fragrance of Fish building, a very beautiful and grand place. The group is already waiting there patiently. They stare at each other without saying anything, standing still and looking very tense. Suddenly, the man arrives, playing with his dangerous weapons, and throws the sharp scythe onto the table. He immediately asks if it's the guy who is buying the land. Cho Hui says that there's something to be said first, and he is immediately insulted by the rude young man. He discovers why Cho Hui wasn't showing any fear. Cho Hui tries to converse with the arrogant man, who tells him to proceed immediately. Jae-il orders him to remove the scythe from the table so they can open the map. He pulls the giant chain, removing the weapon while acting rudely. Jae-il places the paper on the table. The man sees that the marked lands on the map were likely going to be purchased, and his suspicions are confirmed by Cho Hui, making him very angry. A small laugh is heard, putting everyone on alert. The psychopathic woman appears at the window, leaving Jang Il-ryong very startled. Cho Hui asks who that woman is, but even the arrogant man is startled by all of it. She finally enters the mansion through the window, with the intention of killing the man standing there. But it was rather foolish to plan an assassination right in front of the target. She grips her whip, preparing for an attack, and quickly strikes her teammate, questioning his decision. He becomes furious, insulting her again. He then tries to strike her with his sharp scythe. Everyone watches the childish fight, standing still and perplexed. Cho Hui realizes that those attacks were directed at him. He effortlessly blocks both weapons, saying that those fools weren't even people. The arrogant guy is impressed by the masterful defense. Cho Hui stares at him with fury in his eyes, and demands that the fool sit down immediately. He also instructs the ghostly woman to do the same. He looks at a nearby staff member. A staff member approaches to take their orders. The arrogant man orders various dishes and a liquor. Cho Hui flicks something with his fingers in his direction. It hits him squarely on his mediocre forehead. He then reprimands him for his orders, saying he wouldn't buy anything expensive for those useless individuals, even though he was wealthy. The girl remains standing because there were no chairs available. The man starts mocking her, saying she was the one who broke the furniture and was now boasting. Jang Il-ryong calls Hyun Nim to deal with him, but is quickly insulted. Cho Hui makes a small gesture with his index finger. A chair floats over, surprising the arrogant man. He tells the girl to stop drawing attention and sit down immediately, and she thanks him. Cho Hui then begins the conversation he intended to have, asking where the labor that left Ho Chun Rian was hiding. The man questions if they had come from the righteous sect. Everyone there falls silent, saying nothing after that. Jang Il-ryong asks if he really seems so righteous, showing off his huge muscles and the large red tattoo on his back. The man then realizes that he was supposedly from Nokrim, but he also questions why they were there, as the water would expand soon. He thinks about what Nokrim was trying to accomplish and their executable plans during the rainy season in the middle of summer. He deduces that they plan to sail through the expanded river and attack the Namgung family in Anhui. Jang Il-ryong says he was merely following the orders given by his superiors. The two discuss the duplicity of this dark group. The man understands why the leader had asked them to purchase the lands. He mentions all the men involved and says that if the superiors allowed it, he would certainly assist. But the psychopathic woman had a catch in all this. The leader was a very greedy man and wouldn't give up half of Poyang Lake without a fight. She understood that Jang Il-ryong was from Nokrim, but didn't understand why they had asked about Ho Chun Rian's soldiers. Nobody says it was all just a test because it hadn't been easy to believe that they were authorities, leaving them confused and not understanding much. because according to them, there was nothing wrong with their behavior. Jaegal thinks that this situation is very bad, because about 10,000 men would attack Anhui through the Jiang River waterway and the battle would go down in the history books. He considers going to the Alliance immediately to inform them about everything. So the video ends